Joe Rogan Podcast, check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan Podcast by night, all day.
Well, first of all, pleasure. I've enjoyed your work.
Thank
tremendously.
you so much.
I'm a gigantic fan of Going Clear in particular.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I read the book and watched the HBO documentary on it. One of the most bonkers things in our culture today.
Yeah.
I mean, amazing. That Scientology is like still I mean, I passed by the Church of Scientology here just the other day. I was like, still works.
Yeah, they've just moved it. When the documentary came out, some woman had just gone to see it at the movie theater, and it was on the drag, on Guadalupe across from the university, and she drove her car through the plate glass windows of the Scientology building, and she didn't stop there. She drove around the lobby a little bit, knocking over bookshelves and stuff. So I had to issue a statement deploring violence in any form.
Was she a victim of it, or
no? She had just seen the documentary and she was really worked up.
Wow.
So
that's a hype. She might have some other issues.
Yeah, she might. Yeah.
Maybe Scientology could have helped her.
Yeah, ironically, there might have been a course for that.
Well, it's a weird thing when you see so many people that are so successful that are Scientologists. At least you used to see that. I had a neighbor who was one of the nicest guys. He was a great guy. He was in my old neighborhood, and he was a Scientologist. And I found out in the most bizarre way because there was a piece of land that was for sale. And he was talking about this piece of land, about possibly purchasing it, but he was going to have to put it off because he needed $50,000 because his wife was going clear.
Right.
And it was like a scene in a movie where the record skips. And I went, what? Like, what are you doing? And this was me of, I was probably 28 at the time, 29. I was, the podcast is radically changed the way I look at things because I've had a chance to educate myself and have all these conversations with brilliant people and just enough of these conversations where I have a different perspective. But back then, I really didn't know too much about Scientology other than I had bought a book from Dianetics online, because not online, rather, on television, late night TV, in 94. And they wouldn't stop sending me these pamphlets, asking me to come to all these various meetings and this and that, and sending me all these things for programs they have and discounts. And I mean, I was, in one way, I was I admired their hustle. I was like, these guys don't stop.
Right.
Like, they just kept sending this shit to my mailbox. I thought it was like a self-help book. And I would always been into like Anthony Robbins and all these different. I was into motivation. Like, what can I get that's gonna help me like work harder or succeed better, or do whatever. So I saw this thing and it was like, wow, this seems very compelling. And I knew that there was a bunch of famous people that were Scientologists, like Tom Cruise and all.
Right.
I was like, maybe this is legit. And I was reading it and I was like, this is like, seems odd. It seems off. Without getting too much into it. So when I talked to this guy who was my neighbor, really didn't have a deep background and understanding it. But that was the beginning of me like really getting into it. Like talking to him and finding out like how much money he had to spend and what was it about. And like, what do they do for you? And he was explaining how nothing would ever influence you again. No negative influence. That's what going clear meant. That was probably one of the first times I had ever heard that expression.
Yeah. First time I ran into it was when I was in college, and I was my girlfriend and I were living in an apartment above this little storefront, and it was Scientology, and I'd never heard of it before. And they showed me the e-meter and stuff like that, and I just thought it was interesting. I wasn't put off by it. I was, I thought maybe so. I didn't pursue it.
How old were you at the time?
I was 21, yeah. And, it was, I've always been interested in religions. It's one of the themes, I guess, of my work, and why people go into one religion, why they believe one thing rather than another. Because in America, you can believe anything you want. And, that's not true in a lot of countries. But in our country, there's a smorgasbord of religions you can choose from. And if you don't see something, you can make up your own. And, it's a very fertile religious culture, which interests me. And I've, as a reporter, I think about how people have strong political beliefs, and it doesn't affect their behavior at all. Now, you know a lot of people like that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But, if you have powerful religious beliefs, it determines your life. And, as journalists, we should pay more attention to that. So I've always been intrigued by different religious manifestations. And so Scientology was on my list. I had wanted to write about it. And because they're always scaring everybody with, legal threats or, shakedowns and stuff like that.
Do they still do that, or have they kind of backed off from that?
Oh, the people some of my sources for that, they hounded them mercilessly. And, they hire private investigators. They're not doing the job that private investigators are, they're doing is not so much to sneak up on you or, go through your trash, although they do that. It's to intimidate you. And, they had somebody following me around for a while, mainly to my public events, when I was making speeches. I'm in a band, and he came to one of my gigs.
What kind of band are you in?
It's a blues band. We play, Texas, Louisiana music, and we used to back before the pandemic. I don't know if we had a regular gig at the Skylark Lounge in East Austin, and opening.
Well, I want to come see you when
you'll be invited.
Back.
Yeah, we got it. We're going to be really rusty. We need a lot of rehearsal now.
That's to be expected. So, you got really fascinated by religions, and what made you focus on Scientology? I mean, there's a lot of crazy religions out there. One of the weirdest ones about Scientology is we know who made it, right?
Yeah.
It's like him and Joseph Smith. Those are the Mormons and Scientology, the only ones where we know who the creator is.
Right.
And the Scientology one is particularly weird because it was a science fiction author.
Yeah.
It's like that didn't raise any red flags with people. Like,
well, you mentioned Mormons in the same breath, and I think that's apt. They were the most stigmatized religion in the 19th century. Mark Twain hated them. Zane Grey wrote a novel about how wicked they were. They were hounded from one state to another, and Scientology is kind of the modern equivalent of that. And one of the reasons I wanted to write about it is you have these famous and sometimes wealthy people, as you point out, affiliating with this organization. It must be a kind of public relations martyrdom for them. I mean, you can admire Tom Cruise or John Travolta for their acting, but you also think, are they a little nuts? Is there something going on with them that they need this religion? And so why do they affiliate? Why do they lend their celebrity and their standing to such a stigmatized religion? That was one of the reasons I wanted to write about it.
well, they must get some benefit out of it.
That's what and they do.
Yeah.
I'm not, I think especially at the lower levels, they offer courses like Jerry Seinfeld was in for a while.
I don't think he was ever in. I think he was interested in it and he was studying it.
He took some courses.
Yeah.
But
he was never committed as a Scientologist.
What is a Scientologist? I mean, once you're going to the Celebrity Center and you're taking courses, I say you're a Scientologist.
So if you go fishing once, are you a fisherman?
Yeah, that case. Aren't you?
It's a good question.
I'm testing the waters.
I've played basketball a couple times. I'm hardly a basketball player.
It's a little different.
Is it? I mean, I guess it is. But I mean, I feel like taking courses and things doesn't
Well,
make
Leonard
you...
Cohen did as well.
Sure.
And Rock Hudson. I mean, there were... a lot of people were drawn to it. And I think, part of it is Scientology set itself up as a religion for celebrities. It deliberately targeted people like that. And, for instance, if you go to Hollywood and you look at, prominent actors and so on, they tend not to be Southern Baptist. It's not designed for them. And, they may come from a Southern Baptist background, but if they move to Hollywood and they're looking for a group of spiritual seekers like themselves, and they want to affiliate with people like them, Scientology says, here we are. And we have the Celebrity Center where people like you, can come and you can hang around with other famous people.
I think they offer a certain amount of protection. And I think there's something that there for that. And there's also, I think, there's a structure that exists. And I think there's a lot of people that, especially in such a volatile sort of, it's a uncertain world, the world of acting in particular. Yeah. It's such a crazy world. I mean, I always said, if you want a formula, like why is LA the way it is? Well, just stop and think about what it is. You have a bunch of people that move there from somewhere else because they want fame, right? And then you make them audition, which is the weirdest thing. You go into an unnatural environment, usually a conference room. There's a bunch of people sitting around judging you, and you want them to like you enough to pick you to do this thing. So you can't in any way buck trends. You have to be like uber polite. You have whatever the ideology is that's accepted, the general vibe of Hollywood, you must conform to that. You must conform to that, rather. They don't even have opinions. They have this conglomeration of opinions they've adopted in order to be let in to this tribe. And then you hope that they pick you. And so you have these incredibly insecure people who want acceptance and love, and then you make them beg for it. They're essentially going there and hoping that these people will like them. And that's where you get the abuse, like the Harvey Weinsteins of the world and these type of people. It's like they're preying on this need to be accepted and brought into this group in order to work, to be able to work. You have to play this fucked up game. And so if something comes along like Scientology that gives you structure and gives you family and gives you we are for you, we're going to help you become clear. We're going to bring you to the next level. You're a success. It gives you something where you feel like have you ever done martial arts?
I did judo when I was in high school.
One of the beautiful things about martial arts is the belt system. Yeah. Because you when you're a white belt and all of a sudden they tie that blue belt on your waist, you're like, wow, I am making progress. This is really happening. And you feel fantastic. Whereas if you went to a martial art, I did kickboxing for a while, there's no belts. And it just feels weird. Like you don't know where you are. Like where am I? Like it's not the most success. And because of that, some kickboxing systems, even Muay Thai, some weird systems have developed their own belt structure, which is weird. The system they've just sort of added to the existing martial art that didn't have a belt structure. But it's to give people this sense of progress, give people scaffolding, give people structure. Give people this thing where you feel like something is happening for me. And I think that's one of the things that Scientology does really well for these fucked up people.
Absolutely. And, the other thing, you mentioned the word community. When I started writing about different religious groups and asking about beliefs, I noticed that people would always say, well, we believe this or that. And finally I began to focus on the we rather than the belief. Because, the Scientology has, bizarre beliefs, as does, Mormonism. They're out of the mainstream for sure. But especially I can speak about the Mormons, I also wrote about them. It's a beautiful community.
Yeah.
And
nicest people.
Yeah, and Amish, for instance, I wrote about them. They're a lot like Scientology in some ways because they have the same policy of disconnection. We lived up in central Pennsylvania in this little Amish community called Kishicoquillas Valley or Big Valley. And it's famous among anthropologists because they're so schismatic. And they define their community by the color of their buggies.
What is schismatic? I don't know what that word
means. That means they fraction off. So, here's a church, and one part of the church doesn't agree with the other part, so they break off and start another church. Oh. So in this little community, they have the white buggies, the black buggies, and the yellow buggies, and they all have a different set of. It's not a different set of beliefs. They have a different set of practices. You know, like the white buggies are the most. They're called the old order. They don't have. They don't have eaves on their buildings. They don't use electrical power at all, and they're very rigid about that. No pictures on the walls and so on. Whereas if you go up the grade, when you finally graduate out of the Amish, you get into the Mennonite community, then they'll start driving cars. But the most progressive Amish would use tractors only for tractor power. They wouldn't use them in the fields, but they'd use them to help load the hay in the barn. So, but if you're a yellow buggy and your daughter marries a white buggy, you'll never speak to her again, and you're living in the same community. And
Wow.
That's not any different from Scientology. But the reason they do that is to enforce the boundaries of their community. And I think another significant part of this is that we look at Scientology and, Mormonism, and you might laugh at their, the theological construct that their religion is built upon. I think the crazier it sounds, then you have to crawl over this huge wall of doubt and misgivings to accept that Xenu, this ruler of 75 million years ago, sent a bunch of Thetans to the earth and what looked like DC-8s and dropped them into volcanoes where they were exploded by a hydrogen bomb, and their spirits were caught by a net, and then they were set in front of a 3D movie theater. And it takes a lot to swallow that, right? But if you do, or at least if you say you do, you go over the wall and you go join a community that's very supportive. And, you have to say, if somebody, do you really believe that shit? Oh, yes, we believe this. You're reinforcing your affiliation with the community. And I think people have a hunger, especially in our time, for strong communities.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we also like questions to be answered, even if those answers don't make sense, because it removes this bizarre, like there's an existential angst to just being alive, just being on a planet that's hurling through the universe. Above us is stars and space, and there's so many questions, and we have a finite lifespan. If you really start thinking about it, you can kind of freak out. And if it's really open-ended, if you really don't know what life is, if we really were single-celled organisms that became multi-celled organisms, and we used to be a shrew, and a shrew evolved and eventually became a human being, and we don't even know exactly how all these steps happened, and here we are today, and you don't know where it's going, and is humanity even going to make it? And you're not going to make it, no matter what. If humanity dies off, you have a finite lifespan. If you're lucky, you live to be 100. And all those questions are so confusing and scary. And if someone comes along and says, we have all the answers, put your mind at ease. We have Xenu, and Xenu has created you, and you got dropped off in a volcano, and you're here today, and all you have to do is follow these steps, and you will be free of all the confusion and all the emotional stress and the chaos that this life has. You don't need psychiatric medication.
Right.
You don't need anything. You need us.
And also, they offer the prospect of eternal life.
Yeah.
Because the idea is that you are not Joe Rogan. You are a Thetan, and you are an eternal being, and you incarnate in different bodies, repeatedly. And so they will help you discover your past lives, and they'll also help you, save civilization. So you have a noble purpose, and you have the assurance that if you die, you'll keep going, and that's good news. So if there's a reluctance to part with the good news that a lot of religions have to offer.
I had this conversation recently with a friend where we were talking about living forever, and they were like, "I wouldn't want to live forever." I was like, "But do you want to die now?" And they're like, no. And I said, well, do you enjoy life? Yes. Well, I enjoy life. I'm having a great time. Why would you want it to end? Like, if you found out that life right now, like Lawrence Wright, Jamie Vernon, and I sitting here having a conversation, that this is life, and this just keeps going. It keeps going forever. You meet new people, you go to dinner, you go to see a concert one day when the COVID's up, but it just keeps going. Would you be okay with that, or do you need an end?
Well, actually, Joe, I started a group called the Immortality Working Group, and because I'm on the side of living as long as possible. Now, I don't want to be decrepit.
Yeah.
There are things about the possibilities of the end that are pretty awful, and I don't want to endure them.
Yeah.
But one of my associates in my now aging group of immortalists, is that a word?
It is now.
He teaches psychology at the University of Texas, and he starts his class by saying, I'm pretty sure that at least one student in this room will never die.
Whoa.
Because he's, on top of a lot of the research that, there are creatures, they tend to be like seaweed and stuff like that. They are, cancer, is immortal. Their life can be immortal, but in the current construction that we have with our bodies, we're not. On the other hand, in the 20th century, we extended the lifespan of human beings by 30 years. So that's a significant contribution. So there are a lot of things on the horizon. I'm afraid that for me, it's a little over the horizon.
You think you missed the cut?
I'm hoping my children are able to, and my grandchildren now, are able to, but I'd like to be among them.
That the real question is, what are you missing out on if you don't die? Right? Like if you're a religious person, you think there's something at the end of the line. But even if you're a quote unquote spiritual person, or someone who's maybe plunged into some psychedelic waters upon occasion, and you recognize that there might be some things that we don't totally understand about this life that we're living in.
Yeah.
Like maybe there is something that all of these cultures for untold thousands of years have been speculating about a soul, a thing that's not just your physical tissue and your eyes' ability to see what's in front of you and your ears' ability to hear things, but there's a something inside of you. If you ever seen a dead body, it's the weirdest thing. They feel like they're empty. They feel like empty vessels when you see a dead body. It doesn't just seem like the person's not moving. It's like whatever was in them is not there anymore. Now, is that a perception? Is that something you think of because you know the person's not going to move and they're gone? Or is there a thing inside of a person? Is there a thing that creates whatever consciousness is, whatever your embodiment is? Is there a soul? We don't know. I mean, it sounds crazy, but life is crazy.
Well, I've been assaulted with a lot of mortal thoughts recently, and sometimes in the morning when I'm just on the edge of waking, those are the dreams that tend to still be accessible when you wake up in the morning. And the other morning I had a vision of both of my parents in their caskets, and I agree that there's this sense that this is an empty vessel, and where's the life force that was once my mother and my father? I don't know.
Yeah.
But if you're weighing the prospect of heaven, or some assemblage of souls in the cloudy ether somewhere, versus the actual pleasure of life itself, when it is pleasurable. I mean, as a reporter, I can't help but have experienced many people's misfortune. And, there are a lot of lives that I would not want to have spent. But, I cling to the joy of being alive and, the love of my family and my, my work. Those things are incredibly rewarding to me, and I don't want to leave it. So, that's why I'm still looking for the pill or whatever that will keep it going.
Yeah, I've had many life extension experts on the podcast. You know, guys like David Sinclair and Aubrey de Grey and a few
Those
other
are the
folks.
top guys.
Yeah, and it's an interesting prospect. You know, the idea of living for. But I really do wonder if one day you get, like, if a movie's amazing for 3 hours, does it suck when it hits 7? You know, like.
Well, how long would you like to live?
I've never thought about it.
Well, let's, narrow the range. 100 years, 1,000 years, 250, a million.
I don't think I've ever put a number on it. I think I enjoy being alive. I really do. I'm just going to keep going and just. I'm not going to think about a number because those numbers seem like I'm 53 years old. That seems bizarre to me. When I was a child, I thought of a 53-year-old man as being a fucking dead man. He's dead man walking. Like, this is not going to make it. 53. Oh my God, you're so old. You can't do anything. But I can do a lot of things at 53. So I think my perception of what 53 is based on what I thought of it when I was a child, not based on the reality of it. Maintaining your body, being healthy, and enjoying your life. Like, do you enjoy it? Well, then keep doing it. That's my philosophy. That's my thought process. So I put very little thought into my actual age other than knowing, like, hey, you're 53. Maybe you shouldn't do shit that you did when you were 23 because things break easier
Right.
now. That's about it. But other than that, I just think of if it comes to a point where there's a real health crisis, where my body starts really failing, then I'm sure I'm going to have to confront my mortality in a much more direct way. But the way I look at it now, it's like I like life. I'm enjoying what I'm doing. And like you were talking about, like with your life, you're a very fortunate person. You do a thing that you love doing. And that, I think, is, if there's a key to life other than loved ones and family and surrounding yourself with nice people and really realizing that, you can really enjoy your time if you're around other people that are enjoying their time as well. And friendly, compassionate, just very nice people. That's a better world. It's a better life. Some people don't have that option. They've never had that option. So they've been fucked from the go.
Right.
Like from the jump, they've grew up in a terrible environment with terrible people, and they've just encountered violence and crime and hardship, and they really haven't met a lot of very generous, warm, friendly people. They haven't had the opportunity to experience humanity at its best. And unfortunately, when over and over again you've been punished by circumstance, people get hardened. And so their view of life is very different than your view of life or my view of life. They haven't been fortunate.
Well, I'm 20 years older than you, and so those questions are more acute. But and sometimes, like when I'm filling out a form, when they, you come to the year and they have this drop-down menu. It goes. It's like I'm flying past decades and revolutions, presidential assassinations, wars. And I finally come to my birth date, which is 1/3 of the entire history of the United States.
Wow.
Or maybe it's a fourth. It's between a third and a fourth. And, so that's a long time.
That's a crazy thing to think of, isn't it?
Yeah. And a lot of my high school classmates have passed on, and, that kind of stuff happens with, annoying regularity. But I think about these things a great deal. I do feel, like, the Woody Allen line when someone said, but you will live on in your work. And he said, no, I want to live on in my apartment.
Yeah.
I like having some kind of legacy with my family and with my work. But, it's not given to us apparently to understand what else there might be, if there's anything.
Well, that's why religion's so attractive, right?
Yeah.
Because someone comes along
Although
and
not all
answers.
religion, like Judaism, doesn't place much of a interest in an afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the reasons there's a strong sense of civic commitment. A lot of philanthropy among Jews. It is, cities and our culture is so enriched by that kind of philanthropy. And I think it's driven by the absence of an afterlife as a part of their their consideration.
Also, an incredibly strong community.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to get in. I mean, they're not proselytizing.
Right.
Like, you have to go through a lot. I have an uncle that converted to Judaism when I was a child. And it was one of the first times that I ever really questioned religion. I had gone to, two things got me. One was that, my uncle converting, because I didn't know what Judaism was. I was like, wait a minute, there's another religion? I remember being like 6 years old when this was going on. And the other thing was going to Catholic school.
Yeah.
I did 1 year in Catholic school, and that cured me more than anything. I was
Right.
like, there's no fucking way these ladies are talking to God.
Yeah.
Like, if there's a God out there, there's no way he wants these crazy bitches running the show. Like, this is mad. These are angry, crazy people. They're sadists.
Yeah.
You know, torture little kids and scream at you and tell you you're gonna sit on a nail in the closet. You're gonna stay here. You're never going home. And like, woo. And my parents got divorced when I was they split up when I was about 5 years old. So that made me very religious because I felt like I needed something to, like, some stability. And that stability when I was a small child was God.
Yeah.
You know, and so it was the Catholic Church. It was Catholicism. And then going to Catholic school, I was actually excited about it. But then when my uncle was converting, I remember thinking, well, what do they believe? Well, is he going to go to heaven? Like, is he still in? Is he still a part of the team? Like, what happens now? Like, this is bizarre.
He just opted out.
Yeah, well, he went to their... Well, do they have... Their version of the afterlife is very different than ours.
It's just not pronounced, you know. And when I was very pious in my teenage years, so I was a little late blooming.
What started that for you?
I think there was an organization, and it's still around, called Young Life. And it's sort of, it's a Protestant mainly organization that recruits, teenagers in high school. And for me, it was a way of finding social acceptance. I was not much of an athlete. I was not popular. But, you could get into this organization. And the way you advance in a religious organization is through piety. And I think that's what's really dangerous about religion. It's one thing to, associate in the community and enjoy the fellowship of other people that, are searchers or, part of that environment. But if you want to get ahead, you believe it more strongly than the next person. And that allows you to advance up the ranks. And when that happens, when those pious people get control, then the rules start to harden. And, that's what, I think Scientology is a great example of that. But there's so many religions that are exactly the same way. And they start enforcing, they become doctrinaire. And being doctrinaire is their power. That's where they get their, people are afraid of them. They're afraid to contradict them. Because, they have the Bible on their hand, or they have the word of the Lord, or, it could be, you could talk in tongues or something like that. Well, you must be really spiritual. You're deeply into it. Whatever religion there is, there's always a route to power. And I think that's where they often go off the tracks.
Yeah, the levels, right? Like showing someone that you're more pious and that you can almost compete to get to the top. Like there's a ladder to climb.
Yeah. And, and Scientology had the brilliant idea of ritualizing that and monetizing it. So, each of these steps that you take on the bridge to total freedom, as they call it, and you pay very dearly for it, but they're all a notch in your belt. And, the higher you go, the more you're valued.
It's so strange that it doesn't occur to them that it was created by a science fiction author who wrote terrible books.
Yeah, I mean, he has it may not be true still, but he had the Guinness Book of World Records for the number of titles published, more than 1,000, maybe many more.
Never had a second draft.
He used to type on butcher paper on rolls. He had an IBM electric typewriter, one of the earliest ones, and he would sit back and close his eyes and start typing. And and the roll would just go through, and then when he was done, he'd rip it off and then roll in another sheet and start the next story.
So he didn't look at what he was typing?
I don't know. I mean, the legend is a lot of it is, I think, automatic writing, and it reads like that. He would tell a story.
Yeah, well, you're being very charitable because automatic writing could be interesting.
It could be, and
What he wrote was nonsense. He wrote a lot of like really bad fiction.
Yeah, there's no question about it.
Horrible.
But there's one thing I find very interesting about his writings and his, I guess, theology, and I'm not sure what the right word is for the organization of the church and so on, and the organization of his psychology, the whole thing about the Thetans and so on. He, as I said, he wrote thousands of books. How many million pages? No telling how many. There's this uncanny consistency to it. There's a unified vision. And I think that, if you want to go in and start picking it, what he said that was wrong, it's pretty much armored against that. There's, whatever lunacy was driving his mind, it made sense to him. And I think that, Scientology really is just a journey into the mind of L. Ron Hubbard.
He was very much self-medicating in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah, he early on when he got out of the service, and that's where he really, went into Dianetics, the whole idea that he cured himself of being blind and lame when actually he had conjunctivitis, and he wasn't lame at all, but he checked himself into a naval hospital, and he claimed that they told him, he was a hopeless case. And he cured himself with these maxims that became Dianetics. All of that came out of, Dianetics is full of what he says studies show this. And there aren't any studies, but they're all things that he imagined, sitting in that naval hospital. And it comes up with this scheme of self-help, which is really a way of him trying to treat himself. He had asked for the VA for psychiatric counseling, and they never responded. So he sort of was treating himself. And I compare it to a shaman, like in an Indian society, where schizophrenics are often the shamans, and they're the people that go out. Both actually physically go out on spirit quests, but also, they go into hallucinations and they come back and they try to heal their community. And I think basically that's what Hubbard was up to. I know I'm giving him more credit than you think he deserves.
No,
but I think he should be seen.
No, I think you're very accurate in that way. I mean, I think there's also some deception and there's also some fuckery going on.
Oh yeah. But he believes that's all in the service of the great message that he's trying to deliver.
Maybe. It's hard to say, right?
Yeah.
Hard to say what he really meant and thought. But clearly, he also recognized that there was one of the great quotes from him was about if you really want to make money.
Religion.
Yeah.
That's where the money is.
Yeah, I mean, he kind of knew. So it wasn't like he was structuring it in this way where you can go from tier to tier and pay. And like I said about my neighbor, whose wife was going clear, it was $50,000 she was going to have to pay.
Yeah.
These weren't, I mean, he was a carpenter. He wasn't making that much money.
Yeah, if you want to go up the whole rank, you can think about millions.
I wonder if he still lives there. I'd like to go visit him and just see if he's still a part of it.
Well, you can ask the church; they'll tell you where he is.
But it's just, it's weird because, like, for him, it was providing some stability. It was doing something for him, at least the way he's just. I didn't know him that well. Just knew him enough to have conversations with him when we were running into each other outside the house. But he seemed like a real nice guy, and it was giving him some sort of structure,
Right.
something about it. But I almost want to sit down with him and make him watch Battlefield Earth.
Oh God, nobody can watch that.
I've watched it like 5 times.
No, really.
Yeah, I love it. I get high and watch it. It's fucking
Yeah. I
hilarious.
suppose there's one way of trying to approach it.
Yeah, it's like the science fiction version of Showgirls. Like there's movies that you watch just because they suck.
Yeah.
Like you want to watch them just because they're so preposterous. That movie is one of the most preposterous movies of all time.
Yeah, it's horrible, and it's better than the novel.
Is it really?
Yeah.
I've read some of his stuff, and it reads like a 10-year-old writing a story without anyone going, oh, well, Billy, maybe we should edit this down a little. Let's try to consolidate some of these ideas, and maybe there's a better way to phrase this. Like, it's just one draft.
Yeah. No, he just flies through it. I when I was working on that story for the New Yorker, which is where it started. I think many things you can trace back to his experience in the war, and he had this longing to be a hero, and he wasn't. At some point he was in a sub chaser, captaining a sub chaser and off the coast of California, and he took it out. And one thing, he did artillery practice against these islands off of Mexico. So he was shelling Mexico, which is probably it was a hostile action, but he thought that he had come upon a Japanese submarine, and he chased around dropping depth charges everywhere, and it turns out sunken limbs or something like that. And so he had essentially a disgraceful experience in the service. But when he got out, he posed as being having been a spy, that he was on the first ship to be sunk in the Pacific, and he escaped to some desert island and all this sort of thing. Of course, we got his records, and almost every single day of his career is in the service is marked by some sort of report, so we could find exactly where he was, what he did, but the church insisted that he really was a hero, and that they gave me I've forgotten the form, but when you're discharged, there's a form that it gives you your assignments and stuff like that, and he had all these glorious assignments. And then they showed me a picture of all the medals he'd won. Well, that's interesting, and so we got through the records from St. Louis where they're kept, in a huge box of stuff, and I went through it and I found the actual discharge thing, which didn't bear any resemblance to the one the church gave me. And then I looked at the medals more closely, and some of them from foreign countries, some of them from wars, like in the 19th century, and so he couldn't possibly have won them. And so how did they expect me to miss that? It was, and also what was Hubbard thinking? Because he's the one that came up with these medals. He awarded them to himself, and he passed on to the church the legacy of his mendaciousness, and they have to defend it because he's the founder.
Well, there's a thing that happens in cults where people give in to whatever the doctrine is, right? And whether you want to call it a religion or a cult, clearly there was not a lot of research into the veracity of his claims by the people that were a part of the organization. And there's a willingness to give in to the top person. It's a weird thing. And, my background originally was in martial arts, and I saw it a lot in martial arts. Martial arts are very culty, particularly a lot of traditional martial arts. Even the traditional martial art Taekwondo that I was a part of, like the instructor was God. Like they were the lord of this dojang or this gymnasium or whatever you wanted to call it, where everybody trained, and you called them sir and you bowed to them when you saw them. And my traditional martial art background though was legitimate. They were legitimately teaching you a good martial art, and they had these tenets that they thought were designed to increase your human potential, and they were building up your character, and was really what you wanted from martial arts. But I ran into a bunch that were not. A bunch where there was people that were claiming to have special touch, and they could use their chi, and they could touch you in a way. And these people, they don't just exist. There's hundreds of them, hundreds of schools that still exist today. And there's a couple of websites. One of them is Fake Black Belts, and another one, there's Instagram pages, McDojo. What is it? McDojo Life. I'm sorry, I keep forgetting the name. I have too many names of McDojo Life. And they document these people where, like, someone comes at them and they touch like this, and the person, like, shakes and falls to the ground. So you have these students who are part of this horseshit. They give into it. And I don't know if they believe it. I've never interviewed them. I don't know what's going on. But they will run at the person. The person will literally, this master will put his hands up like this, and they'll be paralyzed, and they'll fall to the ground. And it's not one. There's thousands of them. They're all over the world.
Yeah.
And you got to wonder, like, what is happening? How is this so successful in so many different places? There's a thing that happens where someone becomes a part of one of these organizations, and it gives them the sense of community and family, and you have to give in to whatever the belief system is. And the belief system is that this guy has a magic touch.
Yeah.
And you go running at this guy, and you almost like you don't want to buck the trend because you want to keep coming back to this place that you call home. So you give into it. You fall to the ground. But I've seen it all over the country. It exists everywhere. I mean, it exists in Asian communities, white communities, black communities. It seems universal. It's very similar. The man has magic. He has a magic touch.
Right.
And he knows some secret techniques. And none of it makes, especially in martial arts, traditionally, it's very hard to fake because you have to spar. So when you're sparring, people try to test you. So they find out how good you are. They're trying to figure out whether or not they can get through your defenses. But these people have figured out a way to brainwash someone in the weirdest culty way. And by seeing that and seeing how predominant it was and how it was there were so many versions of it, it just makes sense that this would exist in Scientology or Moonies or, fill in the blank. There's a thing with human beings where we want to give in to the chief. We want to give in to the main alpha or whatever, right, for whatever reason. And you see it with, like, people with politically as well. You see, like, people give in to a political leader, whether it's Trump or whoever it is. Like, that person can do no wrong. That is their person. And anything that says anything different is lies and disinformation.
Well, what you said made me think of one of the hardest stories I ever did. I did an article for the New Yorker about the sons of Jim Jones.
Oh.
And not everybody died in Jonestown. He had 3 sons. 2 of them were adopted. And they were playing a basketball tournament in Georgetown, Guyana. And this story took place when you remember the Branch Davidians?
Yeah.
Now that you're a Texan,
yeah,
it's just up the road.
Waco.
Yeah. My editor at the New Yorker at the time was Tina Brown, and she asked me to go, write about the Branch Davidians. And I said, Tina, there are more reporters than Branch Davidians up there right now. I couldn't, But what had been watching the news coverage, and just before, the place was called Rancho Apocalypse, which turned out to be really appropriate. But they sent, before the conflagration, they sent out a van with children, who had grown up in this community. And these kids, as they drove past the ATF and the FBI lines and then the media line, and you could see these children looking out the windows. They were leaving behind everybody they knew. They were leaving behind the only world they knew. And they were going into what? And I thought, what happened to those kids? This must have happened, what will happen to those? It must have happened to children elsewhere. And so I started doing some investigation, and I found out that, Jones had these 3 kids, 3 young boys. They were young men. And there was Jim Jr., who was black, and then there was Stephen, and who was the natural son, and then there was Tim Jones. And for whatever reason, they hadn't talked to anybody, and they agreed to talk to me. Wow. And perhaps it had to do with, the Branch Davidian thing that was going on at that same time.
So this was in the early 90s?
Yeah, it was 15 years after Jonestown. It was actually almost exactly 15 years. And there's a cemetery in Oakland where most of the 900 bodies were buried. And they took a earth mover and took a hill down, half of a hill. And then they stacked all the caskets up and covered it again, but it still has this distortion, and you can see, what remained of the Jonestown followers. But it was interesting to me that the people who joined the Jones cult were all good people. They were all, it was started in Indianapolis and then it moved to the Bay Area, and it was largely largely black. Jones was very, very progressive, on race, but a lot of good-hearted people involved in it. And he was a big figure in San Francisco at the time politically. His support was sought after. He was admired as a community leader, but he was totally crazy and paranoid, and suddenly decided he had to remove the entire group. And you can't tell your family, can't tell anybody. You're going he sent his sons down to Guyana to clear the jungle so they could make this village. And then overnight, they moved, nearly 1,000 people to South America, and leaving behind all their friends, their jobs, and stuff like that. One day, they've been, removed. They've been raptured, off to South America. And so I was interested, in learning more about it. But these young men were totally haunted. But you would certainly relate to Tim Jones. He was physically one of the very powerful. He curled 100 pounds with either hand. But he couldn't get on an elevator. The last time he tried to do an airplane flight, this has been years ago. I don't know if it's changed for him now, but he made the airplane turn around and drop him off at the gate, which is hard to do. But when you're, as physically overpowering as Tim was, he's kind of a formidable figure. And
so he just had all sorts of anxieties.
So I went to talk to him, and he said, "I'll do it on one condition. We have to do it in a public place, a restaurant, someplace where I won't cry. And I want my wife there because I never told her about it." And
wow,
it's a little hard for me to tell this story because we went to a restaurant, and within 5 minutes he was crying, and pounding the table, and the waiter was keeping his distance. People in the restaurant were, frightened. And he told the story of going back. He's the one who had to identify 900 people. His natural birth parents, his adopted parents. He had a wife and children then too. They were all dead. Everybody was dead. And I've never forgotten the power of a religious belief in a personality like Jim Jones, who could persuade all those people to stay with him, train them in this, suicide drills night after night, and then one day it's real. And, the boys felt guilty because they thought if they had been there, they might have been able to stop it, but probably not.
Yeah, I mean, there's been so many of them. It's almost strange that there's not more. That, you have like the Heaven's Gate, which is a very small cult. You have certain sects of the Moonies that are still active, right? Like
Well, there are a lot. To me, Om Shinrikyo, that Japanese cult that was, remember the blind yoga instructor, and they drank his bath water and stuff like that.
No.
Oh, you don't remember? Well, you got a lot catching up to do. But
what year was this?
It was in the 90s, and Om Shinrikyo and is the name of it, and there were like 50,000 members in Japan, and there were a number of them in Russia as well. But there was a far more dangerous cult than. I thought it was more dangerous in prospect than Al-Qaeda, because a lot of these people were engineers and scientists. They were experimenting with poisons. They poisoned a lot of people on the Tokyo subway with sarin gas.
Okay, now I remember this. This.
And they were very adept. And if Al-Qaeda had that kind of expertise, then they were also very interested in weapons of mass destruction, as are some of the white supremacist groups right now. But Al-Qaeda, I think of, and ISIS as being religious cults as well. So I think that they continue to prosper, and what's alarming is how much more empowered they are now with the kinds of weaponry that you can get, the drones. When I was writing about the intelligence community, I got to meet, who is it in the Bond movies that makes the weapon? Q. I got to meet our Q, but he wouldn't show me the good stuff. But but I asked him what he was worried about, and he said the way in which like high school kids can create computer viruses now, we'll soon see them able to create actual biological viruses, because the technology like CRISPR and stuff like that is so accessible. And, that's a terrifying thought.
Mm. Yeah, it is terrifying. I mean, I don't want to downplay what these people have done and how many of them do exist, but it's almost shocking that there's not more.
Yeah.
Because there is this weird, there's a small percentage of people that have this strange desire to have a group of followers that unflinchingly just listen to everything they say. There was a guy in Australia recently that was saying he was Jesus. You remember this guy? You remember this? He had a Mary. Like, he even kind of looked like he could be like, when you think of the stereotypical Jesus painting, like a white guy with beard and long hair, he looked like this guy. And he had this woman that he met, and he was convincing this woman that she was Mary. That's her. But then she found out there was another Mary in the past, and another woman that he had called Mary too. But apparently he said no, he had made a mistake. And people are like, wait a minute, Jesus makes mistakes? You're not sure. How do you know this is Mary? He's like, no, this one's definitely Mary. Yeah. That other one was just a fake Mary. She tricked me.
Have you ever heard of something called the Jerusalem syndrome?
Yes. Yeah.
It's I don't know how real it is, but you do. I've been in a lot in the Middle East.
It's hardcore Christians that go down to Israel, right?
It's not just that. They sometimes you see them saying that they're Jesus, but if it happens to be a Jewish person who's gone off, then they are David. They've chosen a suitably appropriate, iconic religious figure to be. And there's an asylum back in the day when Israel was fighting for its independence in 1948. There was a little Palestinian village called Deir Yassin where Jewish terrorists massacred the townspeople to take it over because it was on a road to the airport. And that village is now this psychiatric institution where people suffering such delusions.
Whoa.
I got to visit it one time when I was in
That's
Jerusalem.
almost too much.
Yeah, this psychiatrist I was interviewing was, his office was in a little Palestinian house.
Whoa. How did you bring that up to him?
Yeah.
What was his reaction?
Well, it's unfortunate, but
Unfortunate.
Yeah,
Jesus Christ. It's like setting up shop in a gas chamber.
it's one of those, historical scars that, you see the Middle East is covered with such places.
Yeah. It's, what is it about people where this pops up? Like, what things have to be in place where someone can create some sort of an environment like that, where they can decide that they're the main ruler, that they're gonna create this bizarre environment, set up these rules, and have all these people follow along with them.
I suppose that there are a lot of people that want to be that person and aren't. They're probably all around us.
Yes.
And, they just don't have the magic charisma to attract the followers. I think, a lot of people that go into, the ministry or into politics or something like that probably have a great deal of that gene. And if they had the opportunity, they would maybe exercise it, to a greater degree. But you have to have the consent of the followers.
Yeah.
And if you don't get that kind of buy-in, then you're not going to have much of a cult. Like your friends, the Jesus and Mary.
Well, I think they've got a group.
Do they really?
Yeah, I think there's a group that followed them. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if they're still active, but it's just a strange. It's like there's these natural patterns that you can find in nature, predator and prey, and food sources and water, and there's these things that just reoccur over and over again, despite the terrain, despite the geography, the part of the world. There's you can kind of see the patterns. But that's one of the weirdest patterns with human beings, is the obviously fraudulent leader who makes up a bunch of crazy shit and pretends that he has some secret wisdom and that, the gods or a god are on his side, and gets all these people to follow them. And even in the Jonestown case, gets them to commit murder and suicide.
Yeah.
It's a strange pattern, whether it's the Heaven Gate guys who all kill themselves because, Hale Bopp Comet was coming and there's people behind it. Are they still around? What's it saying? There's their website. Welcome to Divine Truth. Oh, boy. At what point in time is this lady going?
I don't know. Mary's still hanging in. Mary 2, the Queen Mary 2.
That might be Mary 3.
Cute.
We don't even know. He might have found a new Mary. This one's the real Mary. Yeah. Is there a lot going on? Yeah. Do they have a lot of members? I wonder how many members they have. Divine Truth is hilarious to call it that. Do you think Jesus would be more creative? The real Jesus? Just Divine Truth? That's it?
Yeah. I thought we heard that one already.
You ever heard him talk? It's not very compelling. It's not that good.
There's some of these.
Had mum.
There you go. Give me some. Give me some. Here he goes.
Little Laura. She also has a brother over here.
Fuck that accent,
Okay.
by the way. You can't be Jesus with an Australian accent. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't
forget
think it's going to grow. I have to say, he's not going to be franchising that. Coming soon to a strip mall near
I love
you.
Australian accents. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But come on, that's not Jesus. Jesus would be susceptible to accents? Really? Jesus would be so easily influenced that he would take on the vernacular and the way people, the accents that they use in the region? Come on, get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, well, when he shows up as a Palestinian, there's going to be...
Yeah, right? Right, Jesus has some restructuring to do.
Yeah.
We've got to rethink this whole thing. When you looked at all these various religions, how do you decide which ones to focus on and which ones to write about?
Yeah, it's intuitive. I don't know. I'm drawn by story.
Have you written much about the Catholic Church?
I did write a profile of a defrocked priest named Matthew Fox. who he's a really fascinating guy. He was a Dominican, and he had a college, spiritual university. But he would invite people from different religious traditions, and he set up shop in this convent in the summer when the nuns go on vacation. I don't know if the nuns go on vacation, but for whatever reason, he had it to himself. Holy Names College in Oakland, and I got to sleep in the convent. I was really, how many times do you get that opportunity? But Matt made a sort of tactical error when he invited a witch to come talk.
A witch?
A witch. And Starhawk. She's kind of a famous witch. And
Her name's Starhawk?
Her name's Starhawk, yeah. And so Starhawk got the nuns out, and she built a kettle over a fire, and she had the nuns jumping over the kettle, and this got to the
Jesus
Vatican.
Christ.
And so Matt was out on his ear after that. But I just found him a fascinating guy. He was a kind of a spiritual adventurer. He wanted to know what every different religious idea, and try it out and see what you thought. And it was fascinating spending time with him.
The reason why I brought up the Catholic Church is obviously the sex abuse.
Yeah.
That is one of the strangest religious groups, cults, whatever you want to call it, ever, that is so connected to priests abusing children. I mean, if you say Catholic priest, people automatically in their mind think child abuse. I can't think of another religion where you can say that of. But it's not that there's not great Catholics.
No.
The Catholic religion, in general, I know a lot of Catholics that go to church. They're wonderful people. It's not them. It's specifically these priests. And how did this culture of these priests not just doing it, but getting away with it, getting shipped to different parishes where they didn't know?
Right. Yeah. Did you have such an experience when you were in? So I was in Boy Scouts, which is now similarly stained by that. And I regret, what's happened to the Boy Scouts, because it gave me a lot. I loved it. I mean, I learned a lot of things in the Boy Scouts I would never have learned otherwise. And I liked the comradeship of, the other boys. And some of the scout leaders were a little peculiar, but, they were mostly good guys. I thought about being a scout leader at one point. But I had been a conscientious objector, and they wouldn't let me. So that didn't happen.
In which war?
Vietnam.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I did 2 years of alternative service in Egypt.
Oh.
Teaching at the American University.
I was in Scouts. I was in for 1 year, and I was in a neighborhood outside of Boston at the time. I think it's kind of gentrified now, but it was shady as fuck back in the 80s. It was called Jamaica Plain. Actually, I guess it wasn't even the 80s. It was the late 70s, because I went to high school in 81, so maybe it was 80, maybe it was 79, 80. Either way, a lot of criminals. These kids were sketchy fucking kids.
Really?
Yeah, they were tying other kids to their cots and leaving them in the middle of the woods and doing creepy shit. And they're basically inner city kids having fun with no real authority.
Yeah.
And you leave us all in a room together with bunks, and kids start plotting things and doing things. But fortunately, there was no sexual abuse. There was just a lot of, thuggish young kids.
Yeah.
But also, there wasn't a lot of structure. Like, I remember I just would go, I was into fishing, so I'd just go fishing every day. I would just blow off all their activities and go fishing, and no one seemed to give a shit.
Yeah.
So I just basically was in a fishing camp for a couple of weeks, hanging out with some boys that you had to, keep your eyes on.
Yeah, one of my strongest memories of the Boy Scouts is when we were out camping, and there was a Sunday we go to have this service, and we're up on a bluff over a creek, and there's a bunch of logs, covered with turtles, and so we're up on top of this bluff, and we're praying and this sort of thing, and we all have our 22s, and then after the service, we all go stand on the edge of the bluff and shoot the turtles. That's kind of the archetypal Boy Scout experience.
Well, we had 22s too, and I remember maybe I shot one day, but I remember doing something else, some other activity, and I heard pew! And I realized it was a ricochet. Like these fucking wild ass kids
Right.
had got these rifles and they're shooting rocks and all kinds of different things. And a bullet went ricocheting by us. And I was like, fuck this. And from that point on, I just basically went fishing every day.
Yeah.
I was like, all these other activities are quite dangerous. But there was no sexual abuse. I didn't hear of any. The counselor was a youngish guy. You know, a guy was maybe 20, 21, really nice guy who had gone through the Boy Scouts himself, became an Eagle Scout, did the whole deal. And, you know, for him, it had helped him avoid a lot of the pitfalls of growing up in a bad neighborhood.
That's what I think it can offer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's less connected to child abuse, though, than the Catholic Church is.
Yeah, it's just really going through a big period of that right now. And I'm not sure that bringing girls into the Boy Scouts is the right decision.
Well, without appropriate security measures
Yeah.
being put in place to make sure these boys don't abuse these girls.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're leaving teenage boys alone with teenage girls in the woods. Just seems like a recipe for disaster.
Or a dream come true.
Or fun.
Yeah,
depending on
yeah.
what the boys
Right,
are and who
yeah.
the girls are. And yeah. I don't know. It's just, there's something very strange about that these, like, whether it's the Catholic Church or any group like that, that's connected to abuse of minors. It's very strange. And the fact that it's protected and covered up, you know, and it's all under this one name, but obviously it's very different. It's very different in different places. I mean, you could have a Catholic church that's amazing and everybody's great and it's a great sense of community and everybody, you know, genuinely goes there and it's warm and friendly and they have a good time. And then you could go to a hellscape. You could be in the worst kind of environment ever. And I know people that have been abused that were raised as Catholics, and it's scary.
You know, I did an article in a book later. It touches on this in an oblique way, which was, you remember the kind of ritual abuse scare in the 80s, late 80s and early 90s, satanic ritual abuse.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
I had I was interested in another way of starting this story is I was in therapy, and my therapist, people that I really admired, they knew I was an investigative reporter, and they said, well, you know, we're seeing a lot of patients, especially young women, who've been satanically abused and have multiple personality disorder.
You wrote a book about this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I thought, well, it's interesting. And then one of them said, and Satanists are responsible for 50 murders a year in Austin alone. And I thought, we never had 50 murders in Austin, you know, total. So I didn't say anything. I just thought, wait, it's interesting information. But I discounted it. But I mentioned it to my editor, and I said I was interested in the multiple personality disorder, and this is Tina again, and she goes, oh, that's interesting. And I said, well, you know, a lot of times when they start questioning, they find out that they had been satanically ritually abused. She goes, oh, that's hot. She was very enthusiastic about it. So then I went to a workshop for cops, and there's another cop who was going around the country telling police and sheriff's deputies and stuff around the country about satanic ritual abuse. And he said, they are responsible for 50,000 murders a year in America. And I thought, once again, that's more murders than there are in America. You know, and these are cops telling this story to themselves. And so, you know, and maybe it's true.
What year was this?
I think it was 93 that I did the story.
So pre-internet.
Yeah.
You couldn't just research this.
Before the internet exploded, before what we think of as the internet. And I found this, there was, you know, thousands of lawsuits and arrests, you know, around the country. But there was only one conviction, and it was for this sheriff's deputy in Olympia, Washington, named Paul Ingram. And his daughters had accused him of raping them repeatedly and bringing the neighbors over, and they had been cut up. They had children ripped out of their stomachs and sacrificed. And their other deputies in the Olympia department were involved in it, and so on. And all of this was wild, but he confessed to it. And so I thought, if there's anything to it, then, and I went up to Olympia and I spent a lot of time talking to the cops and, trying to piece together what had actually happened. And because there was a confession, there was never really a trial. So they never had the cops who were investigating it, who were his colleagues, they didn't have to put together a coherent case.
What did he confess to exactly?
He confessed to raping his children.
Jesus Christ.
Well, Jesus Christ had something to do with it because they were all members of this Foursquare Gospel Church, and a very religious family. And the idea of Satan was very real to them. And Erica, the oldest daughter, had made this outcry, and so it started at a religious camp, and then it kind of spread, and then her sister made a similar outcry, and it got. And then they started implicating their neighbors, and all this amazing story of the abuse that they had suffered and how many people had been killed. Pretty soon there were helicopters flying around the county looking for satanic fires and digging up their property, and they never found anything. So I asked one of the cops, well, did you find any bones? Yeah, we did. It was an elk bone. And well, that's not exactly, you found an elk bone? That's the proof? And so it turned out one of the cops had taken these girls in for physical inspection. And there weren't any scars. In fact, they were virgins. So there was never any of the things all the things they had described had never taken place. And yet, Paul Ingram confessed to it because his preacher came in and told him that, God would not allow anything other than real memories to come into his mind. And a psychologist came in and hypnotized him. And pretty soon he was eliciting these fantasies. And so Paul began to fantasize about and at this point the girls hadn't gotten so ripe in their storytelling. He began telling what he visualized. I can see myself going into Erica's room, and the preacher took that back to the church, and the gossip started, and it gets into the ears of the girls, and they start making similar but not exactly the same sort of statements about what happened. So these memories never coalesced. And anyway, Paul, I think he served 13 years in prison for a crime that never actually occurred. And one day I happened to be in L.A., and you remember, since you spent some time there, Amy Semple McPherson? No. She was an evangelist, a great character in American religious history. She had affairs with Charlie Chaplin and so on, and she was, really a huge figure on the scale of Billy Graham or something like that at the time in the 1920s. And she started this congregation. And I talked to the woman who was the camp counselor at that church. And I said, well, how did Erica make this confession? She said, well, it was a dramatic moment. I had been talking to the girls, and I would say, I know that one of you here has been abused. And, I can see you in the closet. I see you hiding. And you can hear the footsteps coming towards you. And some girl, oh, it was me, you know. And so she's eliciting these things. And so at the end of the camp, Erica is on the stage and she's just weeping. And she's not saying anything. And so one of the counselors called over, Paula was her name, come help us understand what's going on with this young woman. And she put her hand on Erica's head, and she says, she's been abused. And then she said, and it's by her father, and it's happened many times.
Oh, my God.
So in the mind of this very religious young woman, the message came from God, that she had been abused. And so she made an outcry that it wasn't hers. It was the camp counselors, really, that started this whole folly. And what happened after that, during that period of time, these kinds of stories took root in daytime talk shows. It was, all over the place, spread to other countries really quickly. Thousands of families were ripped apart by these kinds of accusations. And people like my therapist, brilliant, adorable people, took it on as, their mission was to rescue people like that. And what happened is it drove away people who really had been abused. Their abuse was so insignificant by comparison with these elaborate tales, having babies cut up on you. And I finally decided that these were abortion fantasies. I think, the whole abortion, discussion, put yourself in the mind of an 18-year-old virgin and, drawn to sexual ideas and yet haunted by the prospect of, abortion and all the stuff that goes in it. The fantasies that they elicited were very similar to abortions.
But what caused the father to think that he had done these things? Just because of the hypnotherapy?
That was a big part of it. But when he went into his first session, he made two statements. Well, I don't remember it, but my daughters wouldn't lie.
Oh, God.
And that's what hung him.
Oh, God. There's been a lot of weird cases in the past of people putting memories, particularly in children. Remember there was a very famous case of a child care center.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that?
Well, there have been a bunch of them.
Yeah.
And there was one here in Austin, Fran and Dan. That was actually I attended one of the days of the trial. There was a daycare center south of town. Fran and Dan had operated it for years, and people would go drop their kids off and pick them up after work. And so during this period of time when there was this heightened fear of childhood sexual abuse, some of the parents began quizzing their children, and there were psychologists who would come around with a doll, and it had anatomically correct, and did anybody touch you? Sort of suggestive,
right.
And so they elicited some stories from these children, and the stories were, Mommy dropped me off, and we flew to Mexico, and we killed a giraffe and buried it, and childhood fantasies,
right.
Along that line, and the police couldn't prosecute, the idea that somehow they had all flown on a private jet from a daycare center in South Austin.
And then killed a giraffe and had enough time to come back
right.
home.
So, eventually, they start, they assemble, of these psychologists who are, using these dolls and so on to try to elicit, did Dan ever touch you any place that made you feel uncomfortable? You can tell me. It's okay. If you don't feel, so it eventually a child agrees to one of those things, and then other parents hear it, and oh my God, she was abused by Dan. Honey, did Dan ever, So it began to. There was never any real evidence, but when the day I was there, they put a child on the stand, and she had her doll and a lollipop in her mouth, and she was sitting on the lap of I forgot, it might have been her mother, but the prosecutor is he says, did Dan ever touch you? And no. And did he ever hurt? No. Your Honor, can we have a recess? And then it was yes. And it was shocking to me that that children were manipulated in that fashion. Lives were destroyed. Eventually, Fran and Dan were exonerated. But they were.
There's always going to be people that believe, though.
Yes, they will, and they attacked me. Because I signed a friend of the court brief about implanting memories, as you suggested.
How could anyone not know that if you lead children in a certain way like that, they're going to make things up, or I don't even necessarily think children totally understand memory. Think about how humans misconstrue memories. Memories are terrible. I've said this before. If you ask me what I did a week ago, I have a blurry slideshow in my head.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a calendar that I can tell you, I had a podcast on that day and a comedy show on that day, and I can't recall it like a movie, like a 4K, film that I could just rewatch. That was the exact moment I knew something was wrong. We don't have that kind of memory. But some people are so fucking sure of their memory. And it's crazy. What is happening in your head? What is your memory like? Because my memory's terrible.
No, I have strategies to try to remember, why I walked downstairs. What did I want to get? And, that's just immediate memory. But, I keep a journal out of defense, for make sure that I remembered things correctly. If there's something happened to me that I want to remember, I'll write it down.
Sure.
Because when I'm writing, when I'm researching, like when I wrote about the Looming Tower, about Al-Qaeda, I interviewed 600 people. I don't remember all that.
Right.
And I read all these books and stuff. I take note cards. And I had, this elaborate, I had almost as long as your table, boxes of notes, and very scrupulously ordered, because I can't remember it. And, but put it on note cards, I can find it.
But it's just so strange that, I guess back then they didn't know about memories well. That would never fly today. If you tried leading a child that way today, the defense attorneys would intervene, and they were saying...
This wasn't so long ago.
How long was this?
It was in the 90s.
Yeah, but even in the 90s, It seems like not that long ago, but, 30, 25 years ago, that's a long time ago now.
Yeah, I guess you're right. At that time, we had 4 hospitals in Austin, and by the time I wrote this, they each had a dissociative disorders wing, which is like multiple personalities. We had enough multiple personalities in Austin to stock 4 different psych wards. And then when my article, mainly the book, when the book came out, insurance companies decided not to fund, to fund psychiatric investigations into, certain dissociative disorders, including multiple personalities and repressed memories like these. And those wards disappeared. Once the money dried up, there was, just no support for it. The whole architecture of the repressed memory syndrome just vanished.
The repressed memory thing is very strange to me. It's very strange, because there's been so many cases where people have led the person who's particularly under hypnosis, led them into these memories, almost helped them. And there's real evidence that you can do that, that you can sit someone down and impart or implant a fake memory of an event, particularly under hypnosis. There was a guy named John Mack. It was a Harvard psychologist who he did a lot of work with people that were having hypnotic regression stories of UFO abductions.
Right.
And that was one of the main criticisms, was they thought that he was leading these people into these ideas and suggesting these ideas and giving these people, like, I don't know if he did or didn't, but that's the kind of thing that you could do to someone if they were under hypnosis. You could implant some kind of like crazy, fantastic memory of, visitation in the middle of the night.
I had a story when I was working on the repressed memory story. I ran across this study that was another thing you wouldn't do now because of the conventions of experimentation have changed. But a psychiatrist in Georgia had a patient, and he told her in advance what he'd like to do. I want to hypnotize you and see if I can elicit a memory that didn't happen. And so she agreed, and he hypnotized her, and he said, Helen, you were late today coming to your session, which wasn't true. What happened? What delayed you? I don't know. I was driving, and I saw a cow on the side of the road. Oh, really? What was the cow doing? It was giving birth, and it was having trouble. And so I got out of the car, and I tugged on the calf, and I helped, and he said, and there was a light above. And she said, and a spaceship came down. And, and I got on the spaceship, and, two things. You were late, and there was a light. And she came up with a UFO fantasy. And
the cow giving birth.
The cow was pretty amazing, But what was interesting about that is that when she awakened, he told her what she had imagined. And he said, this wasn't true. This is, we're on time. I don't think there's going to be any baby calves on the side of the road. No spaceship, but this didn't happen. She couldn't shake the memory. It was as real to her as, the actual drive into the office.
Have you been put under before?
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I was in the 8th grade, I discovered the abnormal psychology shelf in the library. And I used to hypnotize people. I was
really,
yeah.
When you were 8?
I was in the 8th grade.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I was 12, maybe
8th grade. Yeah,
and
that should be 13, no?
Maybe I was 13, and I hypnotized my sister. She was a somnambulist. She was easy. She was a somnambulist. There's the people who walk in their sleep, and so they tend to be very suggestible. And she was a good subject for a beginner, and I used to hypnotize her and make her rigid and suspend her between chairs and then stick pins in her. Make sure that she was really under, and then I would hypnotize my fraternity brothers. I hypnotized my girlfriend.
Jesus.
I finally gave it up because I thought, this is really irresponsible. So I was probably, by that time, by the time I realized how irresponsible it was, I was probably responsible enough to do it. But I haven't hypnotized anybody in many years, but the only time I tried to, I had a dentist in Dallas when I was a kid. He used to hypnotize people, and he's going to drill a cavity for me, and I said, I'd like for you to hypnotize me, and so it was. your mouth is feeling like a block of wood. Your mouth is feeling like a block of wood. Nurse, I think he's ready. And I said, no, I'm not. Give me the Novocaine. But then the only other time that I had what was kind of success in being hypnotized was in 1983. It was the 20th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination. And I had grown up in Dallas during the assassination. There was a story that was quite widely circulated that school children in Dallas had laughed when they heard the news. And I wasn't sure that I hadn't been one of them. I remember being astonished. I remember gaping. I remember, did a ha 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 come out of my mouth? I don't know. If it did, but I think I smiled in amazement. I'm not really sure. I mean, you have to go back to what Dallas was like at that time. It was hysterical. The politics were off the rails, and Kennedy was hated, although not in my family. But, there was this sense of Dallas as being a separate entity from the rest of the country, and that Kennedy was the enemy. And I was anxious that maybe I had been one of those people that laughed. And so I had a friend who was a therapist who did hypnosis, and I asked her to hypnotize me and see if she could take me back to the classroom and help me remember. And so she put me under, regressed my memories, to the point that I hear the ding, 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 PA system and the choked voice of our principal coming on. And
did she tell you you're hearing these things? Did
no,
you just
she's asking me, what
you could recall.
Yeah, what do I recall? And I remember seeing, the face of my friend Steve Zink, one of my classmates in the algebra class, and I couldn't get it myself. And so she gave me a post-hypnotic suggestion that I would have a dream, and it would reveal to me what I had experienced. And so I did have a very vivid dream. And I was flying in a helicopter over the canopy of what I thought was Vietnam jungle. And you were looking for a child. And I saw it in the top of a canopy, just lying on top of the tree. And as we got closer, I realized it was actually just a doll with these little X eyes. And that was the dream. And I decided from that that the me that I thought, might have laughed was just a figment, an effigy of some sort. And that, I really hadn't laughed. You'd have to understand what a scarring experience it was to have been from Dallas at that period of time and how everybody in the world hated you.
Such a strange thing to try to remember. What was your reaction? And how old were you at the time?
13, I guess.
But it's a very strange thing. Did you feel like you felt guilt at the possibility that you had laughed?
Yeah, I did. I didn't want to be one of those people. Yeah. And, I have friends from Dallas who do remember people in their classroom laughing. And my experience that the real memory I have of it is that people looked around in just stunned astonishment. And part of the astonishment, I think, was that we just thought nothing would ever happen in Dallas. It was, on the one hand, it was totally crazy. And on the other hand, it was totally paralyzed. There was just a sense, the conformity was so powerful that, you felt imprisoned by the sameness of every day, every thought, just it was very, very rigid environment.
So some spectacularly unique occurrence, like the president getting assassinated in Dealey Plaza, just seemed impossible.
oddly enough, no. I mean, that was the thing. You know, if it was going to happen anywhere, it seemed like Dallas would be the right
Because
spot.
they hated Kennedy.
And even that morning, I went out to get the newspaper, and there was that famous ad, "Welcome Mr. Kennedy to Dallas." You know, just this bleak thing, and then there was, you know, it's just.
How was it bleak?
Oh, it made all these absurd charges about, you know, his aiding communists and so on, and race, you know, it had a racist undertone to it. It was, there was, yeah, there it is. It shows up.
Huh.
You can see how it's.
I can't read all that.
Well, it says,
unfortunately.
"Welcome, Mr. Kennedy, to Dallas." You can see that it is saying a city. It's about who we are, and we are not you. And it was almost. And then there, in the same newspaper, maybe your guy can find it. There is a wanted. Oh no! Wait a minute. It's separate. It was on top of the newspaper was a wanted poster for Kennedy with full face and profile. Somebody had placed it on top of that. And like wanted for treason or something like that.
There it is.
There it is.
Wow, wanted for
Yeah,
treason.
that was on our doorstep that morning. So that was the atmosphere of Dallas in 1963.
Wow.
There was a, you know, Adlai Stevenson had come to Dallas in October, the month before, to make a speech about the United Nations, and he was the UN ambassador. And he was assaulted, and he went out to greet the crowd. He was booed down. And by the way, I think Lee Harvey Oswald was in the audience that night. But he went out and to try to talk to the crowd. And Stanley Marcus was his escort. And he said, don't try that, Adlai. You know, this is crazy. But people were really worked up. They, you know, this woman was holding a sign, and she whapped it down on top of Ambassador Stevenson's head. And the sign said, "If you seek peace, ask Jesus." So that's, for some reason that always struck me as the Dallas. And I just want to say, as I'm talking about Dallas in the past, Dallas of today is a totally different place. And I think in some ways, you know, it was so chastened and humbled by that horrible experience. I've said in the past, if Kennedy had to die somewhere, I'm grateful he did in Dallas, because it made that city a far better place. And you know, remember the police killings a few years ago, 9 cops, the way it was a block away from the Dealey Plaza. But the way in which that city handled that tragedy, by comparison, was so magnificent. You know, I have a lot of admiration for the city that Dallas has become.
Yeah, I love Dallas. It's a great city, but that is has a crazy slice of history, and it's so fascinating how no matter who the president is, there's always some faction that think that one person, that figurehead, is the enemy of democracy, the enemy of freedom, the champion of whatever, you know, whether it's the communists or Soviets or fill in the blank, whoever it is, China, whoever it is.
Right.
There's always going to be some faction that think that person is the real reason why we're all fucked up.
Yeah, it's the tension of democracy. Yeah.
You were telling me, we were talking before this podcast started about, and I said, we got to stop talking. Don't say anymore. Because you wrote a novel about a pandemic, and you wrote it, and it came out during the pandemic.
Right.
Which it's almost like great timing and terrible timing. Like George Carlin had a particularly damning special that was going to be released around September 11th, and they never released it because it was very anti-American.
Yeah.
You know, George Carlin was, as he got older, was very much a curmudgeon, and he had some great rants, and they just felt like this is just not the appropriate, like post 9/11. You know, it's just right after the tragedy. But your novel that you wrote, like when this was all going down, your novel came out in April, right?
Yeah.
when this was all going down, we'd already been shut down in March. I mean, that's when it really hit the United States. Like, what was that like for you to have this sort of coordinate? Just
It was weird. It's still strange to me. It started a decade ago when Ridley Scott had me write a script. He had read the Cormac McCarthy novel The Road, which is this post-apocalyptic story of father and son. And so Ridley said, well, what happened? Because Cormac didn't bother to explain. And I thought, well, how would civilization end? And so I conceived of a pandemic being more interesting than an atomic bomb, for instance, because it's hard to find heroes. And public health, I've always been fascinated by the kinds of people. I did a number of stories out of CDC when I was a young reporter. And, I thought, if these people are really cool, they're brilliant, they're humble, they're incredibly courageous. They go off to these hot zones. Would you want to go to an Ebola zone? I mean, just horrifying. But, off they go. It really intrigued me. Ridley didn't make it, and he was right to, because I hadn't solved the problems of the story, and I hadn't done enough research. So I stuck it away, but I never forgot it, and I thought I really wanted to revisit it, because I thought, in a way we're due. I had studied the 1918 pandemic when I was writing a story about the 1976 swine flu fiasco, and it was so awful. 675,000 Americans killed. As many as 100 million people worldwide. And, 675,000 Americans was more than all the soldiers who died the American soldiers who died in all the wars of the 20th century.
And we have to take into consideration the size of the population back then was so much smaller.
Right. But October 1918 is still the deadliest month in American history. So when I decided I was going to write this, first of all, I went out and interviewed all the people that I would want to talk to, just as if I were doing a nonfiction novel or a nonfiction book or a New Yorker story. And I made a calendar on my computer that was based on 1918. And it was, what happened in, March of 1918 corresponds roughly with what happens in my novel, which is set in 2020. So it was meant to be a kind of cautionary tale. And in January, I began to hear about this unidentified virus in China. And I thought, geez, that could be something. SARS in 2003 happened. The Chinese hid it. There was this virus going around. Nobody knew anything about it. The World Health authorities went over to investigate, and Chinese authorities took patients out of the hospital and put them in ambulances to hide them until the authorities left. And, this thing went, I think, 37 countries before it was smothered, fortunately, by good health practices. I thought this is, early on, and by February, I was telling my wife to start stocking up on groceries, because I'd just written this novel,
How long did it take you to write it?
A year and a half, I guess.
Just the timing is insane.
Yeah, I was on, for one thing, this British presenter, when I was promoting the book, said, I don't think anybody paying attention to this book at all. If it weren't for this pandemic, I think you're probably right, but it's not such a smart publishing strategy to bring out a book when the bookstores are closed. It's just, I'm going to have to remind myself not to do that again.
Yeah.
But it was weird because the story became what I got right and what I got wrong. And it is interesting. I mean, I did the research and I talked to the experts. Like, one of the guys that I talked to, Barney Graham, he works at National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases, which is Dr. Fauci's shop. He helped me design my novel virus, and he helped me cure it. He's the guy that invented the vaccine that is in both the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. And I had him to myself. He was one of many people in that category who advised me about, how would you make a vaccine and so on. So I did all the research, and I asked them, my sources, suppose we had another event like 1918. Would we be any better prepared than our ancestors were? And the answer was, this is our biggest nightmare, and there were a lot of reasons for it. But one is, we don't have a vaccine, we don't have any therapeutics. We'd be in exactly the same spot, and that's what happened.
Just the timing of it is impeccable. It's crazy. When did you finish the book?
I finished it in August of 2019, I guess. Maybe July, maybe it was in the summer, and I called it the end of October because October was the deadliest month, and October Revolution Island off the Russian coast plays a role in it. So anyway, it was I enjoyed the work. I especially I love research. And I wouldn't be in this job if I didn't, But part of the time, my hero's on a submarine. So I got to go to Kings Bay, Georgia, where we have our nuclear fleet, and to get a little tour of the submarines. And, not everybody gets to do that sort of thing. So yeah. I was able to make, I like to make things as real as possible. And then it gives you a sense of authority when you sit down to write.
It had to be a bizarre feeling to have finished that book and have it come out in the middle of the pandemic. I mean, you almost had to feel like maybe the simulation is real.
In the going back to what I got wrong, everything unfolded exactly as I had anticipated, unfortunately, but I didn't anticipate how people would self-isolate so willingly, really. I mean, it's frayed now, but at the cost of so much. So it's impoverishing. It's spiritually, socially, culturally. In so many ways, it's damaged us, and yet it's a price that so many people have been willing to pay. But my take on government was totally right. Government's fucked up in the novel, and maybe I underestimated how badly the government would behave in this one.
You wrote a long piece, you were saying, too, right before we started, about COVID. Would you write it for, what was it, for
the
New Yorker?
Yeah, it's out now. It's called The Plague Year, and it occupies most of the magazine. It's people like Barney Graham are sources of mine now. The same same sources I use on my novel, but there it is. Yeah, it's gotten a lot of reaction, and I'm writing it as a book now, but it's heartbreaking. It's a tragic story. The novel is, tragic, but it's a novel. This chronicling of what happened to us this year has been really hard. And I think what has been missed in a lot of the coverage is just the personal experience of this catastrophe. And, a lot of the stories I tell in there, they're hard stories.
Well, it's an insane and in our lifetime unprecedented time where there's never been a moment where people have been asked to stop doing everything, and it still didn't work.
No.
And in fact, in a lot of places it was worse, where they asked people to lock down, than in places like Florida or in Texas, where They don't shut everything down the same way.
Well, we went through it in Texas like so many states, for one thing, the governors should never have had to do this on their own. There was never a national plan, and there should have been.
But wouldn't the national plan vary depending upon the pandemic, depending upon what the virus was? And I mean, it's one thing if you're dealing with something that's as contagious as the measles and as deadly as Ebola. That would have required us to take extremely drastic measures. And that was a lot of what we feared was going to be coming with COVID. I mean, there was an initial thought of what the virus is going to do, and this insane reaction to that, anticipating that, but no correction once we realized what it had begun, and also no correction once we realized what the consequences of the lockdowns and this we're now into 9-10 months of this isolation and fear and the economic disaster and despair. It's so much happening, and trying to find the path out of it is the weirdest part.
Yeah. In many respects, the economy is correcting itself. It's not dead as it was, a few months ago. You see a lot of activity. Many, one of the people I talked about in my story was a Goldman Sachs analyst, Steve Strongen. And, at first, we had the biggest plunge, in recorded history. And, one of the analysts at Goldman was saying, usually if you're trying to do econometrics, I think it's pronounced econometrics, you analyze, wage increases and how would that affect spending patterns and then, restaurant availability. And then in this case, there were no restaurants. You subtract that from the economy. Just take out airlines. It said it's more like arithmetic. You just strike them. And, that's just never happened before. And yet there's another thing that's going on, which is that the economy is reorganizing around a new reality. And that's one of the things about capitalism that's good, is it's nimble. And, it sees opportunity. Initially, when the markets crashed and unemployment went, further south than we've ever seen it go, the stock market just froze. And then there was a realization, according to one of my sources, when they learned that this was transmitted asymptomatically. In other words, you can have it and not have any symptoms and infect me. Then investors realized the usual treatments, public health approaches, weren't going to work. If you have symptomatic transmission, you get sick, you go to bed. So you don't transmit so much. If you are sick and walking around the world and greeting everybody and passing it off, that's an entirely different experience. And that's why this disease is so sneaky. And from the Wall Street point of view, it was, oh, fuck. So they wanted, at that point, they'd gone from just trying to, get some money to operate their businesses to rushing to safety. So you had 5 stocks like Amazon and Apple and so on, occupying 20% of the S&P. And, but Strongen said, that's not the purpose of Wall Street is to move money from businesses that are no longer useful into the businesses of the future. And that's when you see the rush for opportunity. And that's why the stock market has gone so crazy during this period and gone into historic highs where people are still, many people are still underwater. And, there's going to be a lot of economic damage that's going to last for quite a long time.
Yeah, I don't understand how they're going to pull out of it. When you look at, like, Los Angeles has lost 75% of its restaurants.
Yeah.
It's just insanity. I mean, what percentage of small businesses are still barely hanging on? How many have they lost already?
Well,
How
like
many-
Austin, your new city, used to be known as the live music capital of America. Is there a more vulnerable business to be in than a bar that plays music? And, the bar that we patronize, Skylark Lounge, a lot of old musicians play there. Miss Lavelle White, who was born in 1929, was
Whoa.
still singing the blues at Skylark. And
1929.
yeah, she's a great blues legend.
Wow.
But the a lot of the bars are permanently out of business, but so I think are a lot of the bands.
Yeah.
Musicians typically live on a really small, level of comfort to start with.
As do comedians.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, we lost Cap City Comedy Club in Austin, which is
Really?
one of the best clubs in the world.
Yeah.
An amazing club that had been open for 34 years, I believe. Maybe more. Might be 35. And it went under while I was here. We're hoping to bring some comedy back. I want to start a place once it feels like it's responsible and safe to do it. But it's just such a tricky thing to figure out when and how and what to do and measures to take place. I've been doing these shows at Stubbs Amphitheater with Dave Chappelle, but we test the whole crowd. So they get there early, they get tested, and they've only had to turn away a couple people. And that was not even the shows that I was a part of. I just did one spot on one of those shows, and Dave had done 3, and out of those 3, so for 1,200 people, they turned away 2 people that tested positive. I don't think there was any other ones.
The audience for comedy is safer than the average population then, because our positivity rate right now in Texas is over 20.
Is it 20%?
Yeah.
Yeah, in Los Angeles, they think it's so crazy that 1 out of 20 people has gotten the virus, either gotten over it or is currently infected. 1 out of 80 currently have it, I think. That's the most estimates
And
right
this
now.
new strain is sweeping through,
Yeah.
In California in particular, it's driving out the old strain really quickly, as it did in the UK. It was stunning how quickly it overtook the contagion.
Yeah, it's more contagious, but not more extreme in its symptoms or anything like that, right?
That's what they say, and but I haven't heard that it's less. So
I did, but it was from an unreliable source.
yeah, I know. I think there's wishful thinking involved in it. In 1918, there was a mutation that made it more fatal.
Well, the weirdest part about this is the asymptomatic people. That there's somewhere in the neighborhood of, as much as half the people that get it don't even know they have it.
More than half. Maybe as much as 70%.
That is
but that's
so
true.
crazy.
That's true of polio also, for instance. Only like 1 out of 200 cases of polio actually ever goes to see a doctor. And
What?
When I was a kid, I grew up in the polio era. And one morning I woke up, I'm about 5 or 6 years old, 6 maybe, and I couldn't move my legs. And, it was terrifying. And I think it was a reaction to a tetanus shot that I had gotten. There's a syndrome called Guillain-Barré, which is very similar to polio in some ways. In fact, there's a lot of scholarship now that says that Franklin Roosevelt may have had Guillain-Barré rather than polio, because onset as an adult was so unusual. And it might have been the horse serum in which the tetanus shot was grown, or it could have been something else entirely. But I don't know. I don't remember how many days it was before I was able to move, but I was, and it was a scarring fright, and I'm been advised not to take flu shots. And it's one of the reasons I have been so interested in this vaccine. And I'm going to take it because, the kinds of, possible pollutions that, like horse serum or flu shots grown in chicken eggs and stuff like that, it's not a feature of this vaccine, at least not the Moderna and the Pfizer.
With any kind of vaccine, there comes a certain level of paranoia, especially a new vaccine. And that's been fascinating and frightening to behold and to read online, all of the crazy theories and what people anticipate could happen. And, people that say, I'm not taking that fucking thing, and all the people that are terrified of it and don't want to try what they deem to be an experimental vaccine.
I'm hesitant to get into this because I don't want to encourage the anti-vaxxers, because I think it's important for the nation to protect itself, the health of our communities. But this is a story that is where a lot of the anti-vaxxers come from. Is 1976. There was a young recruit at Fort Dix, New Jersey, named David Lewis. He was 19 years old, healthy, young soldier, and he was on a march. He got sick on the march, and died, quickly. And there was flu on the camp, but they sent in his blood sample to the CDC, and they couldn't find any modern flus that it corresponded to. So they checked against swine samples. And pigs, after 1918, became a reservoir for the 1918 flu. We gave it to them, and they kept it. And so they've been over the years, there were occasional examples of farmers, getting sick from their pigs, and but it was the H1N1 strain, which was 1918, and that's what killed David Lewis. So, and there were several other soldiers that had gotten it but weren't that ill. So, I decided I would write about it, and I went up to Fort Dix. At the time, Gerald Ford was president, and the question was, should we vaccinate everybody? And flu vaccines, were already kind of on board. All you had to do was change the formula, and so it wasn't like what we're going through now. And the head of the CDC, David Sensor, at the time said, we're going to go whole hog. He says, we're going to vaccinate everybody in the country. And so I went up to Fort Dix to find out what was going on. And I talked to the environmental health officer from Macon, Georgia. And as we were talking, I said that I had talked to David Lewis's mother, who was a nurse. And he said, "Hey, did she tell you about that pig?" And I said, "What pig was that?" "Oh, some story. David ran into some pig, God knows." And so I called Mrs. Lewis, and she thinks, yes, this was where David got sick. So the question was, did he get sick from a pig, or was it a human disease? And his fiancée, a very attractive young woman, they were going to go in the mission fields, and she was a nurse and a pilot. She's a lively person. Peg Lapham. She and they had been driving over Christmas from her home in upstate New York to his home in Massachusetts. And the snow had closed the road down to a single lane. And they came up on a pig in the middle of the road, a big 200-pound hog. And David nudged it to see if he could move it, but so he got out and grabbed the pig by his ears and pulled him off to the side of the road. So the question was, did the pig cough in his face?
Oh, Jesus.
Because if he got it from a pig and he got a huge viral load, and then some other people may have gotten it from him, but they didn't get that sick and it died out. Because in 1918 you had 100 million people dead, and so far you had one, but you're going to vaccinate everybody. So we had to find the pig. So we went house to house on this Route 23, knocking on doors. Did you see a pig out in the road, over Christmas? And a lot of people had. And finally, it wasn't too hard to find the owner of the pig. He lived in, my memory may be a little wrong, but it seemed like a double wide trailer. It was a house pig, not evident at the moment, but it was his pet. And he had been in a railroad accident and lost a couple of limbs and was propped up against the refrigerator. And I proposed to him, "I just like a little blood from your pig. I take it to the CDC. They'll analyze it. The whole country's waiting in line to get these inoculations. And if it happens that your pig is the source of it, then, we might be able to save everybody a lot of trouble." And so he looked at this girl on the couch and he said, "I know you. I know your family. I know where you live. You fuck with my pig, I'll burn your house down." Wow. Welcome to epidemiology. I said, really? We don't have to go that far. We finally worked a deal where his vet extracted a little blood, sent it to the CDC, and the pig had never been sick a day in his life. Well, millions of Americans, I think it was 26 million Americans, were vaccinated before there were hundreds of cases of Guillain-Barré. And a couple of dozen people died. And Gerald Ford called off the vaccination and lost the election. It was a fiasco. And, history might have been different if that pig had been sick. But going back to that, you can see a government in disarray rushing, ill-advised into, the most extreme position, which is vaccinate everybody. Don't wait to see if it spreads. Of course, I understand their hesitancy about waiting. This is a disease that has a history of, leveling in, all of civilization. So you don't want to treat it lightly. But, they sped to the finish line. And unfortunately, it caused a lot of damage and left a legacy of distrust that has never really gone away.
And yet here we are.
Here we are in a very, very similar spot.
Yeah.
It was an election year, a novel disease, we haven't seen. Hey, we're gonna get through this. One of the things that with all the misjudgments that have been done, especially by the government, there have been a lot of heroic and brilliant people out there working on this. And I had the privilege of meeting so many of them. And I'm totally confident, even given my own history of having a vaccine reaction. I think this vaccine is a lifesaver.
I hope you're right.
I do too.
Yeah. Do you take any extraordinary measures to protect your health, or have you done anything different during this pandemic?
No, it's been a very isolating experience. And as a reporter, it's hard. I miss, too, I miss my friends. I miss travel. I miss playing music. There's a lot of things that I've really, really missed, but I have not. I don't want to put my family at risk.
Yeah. You're in the age group where you can get the vaccine, though, in Texas. Yeah. There was some real controversy as to whether or not they should vaccinate essential workers first or older people that are more at risk. And there's been some weird shit written about that that's flavored with social justice and all sorts of. I'm sure you're aware of all that.
I'm sure that, I would like to get the vaccine. I've looked for it. I've signed up with our local pharmacy. And I'm not, actually, healthcare workers are positive at a lower rate than the general population, strictly because they behave themselves. They wear masks, they wear, PPE, they're careful.
And they really know how to wear the mask properly, too.
Yes, they do.
Sealed to their face.
Yes, and they often wear face shields and stuff like that. But on the other hand, they're confronted every day with the possibility of, and I've talked to a lot of these people, some of them are single. They haven't seen their families in 10 months. There's nurses living in basements of their own homes so that they don't infect their children. They don't know if they haven't got, every day they don't know if they haven't gotten infected that day.
Right.
And so, yes, I think they should be at the front of the line. But I'm going to be competing with Uber drivers, and there are a lot of lobbies coming out for we're next, and it's a hard judgment to make about who's the most valuable. You start looking at elderly people, well, they have less life to lose, and so that's an argument against going out and vaccinating people like me who are so desperate to live forever.
Yeah.
But it's all made more difficult by the failure. At every stage we've failed, but this is the final stage, and we're failing at getting the vaccine out and getting it into the arms of the people who need it.
And what's the issue here with the failure?
Start with, over-promising. I was told by Pfizer back in September, I think, when maybe it was August, when they had the results of their first trial. It was really, really positive. And they were going to have 100 million doses by the end of the year. Azar, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, predicted, that we'd have 100 million vaccinations, and then it was 40, and then it was 20, and now, as it turned out, a little less than 4 million vaccines by the end of 2020. Moderna is now coming online, and that's going to supplement things a lot more. But it's my doctor, there's a sheet that says, where all the vaccines are going, and it said that he'd gotten 500 doses. He doesn't have any. He never had any. I don't know what they're saying, but, there are all these different entities that claim that they have vaccine, or that it is claimed that they have it, and they don't have it.
Yeah, it's a mess.
And they're also worried about not having enough vials to put the vaccine in. So you may have a huge amount of vaccine that you simply can't bottle.
Well, there's also the transportation issue, right? Because it has to be insanely cold.
And the other vaccines are going to come online soon too. AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, Sanofi. There are a bunch of others, but probably the gold standard is the Pfizer and the Moderna, which is the same vaccine that Barney Graham and Jason McClellan invented. When,
you wrote a novel about the pandemic, you wrote this piece for The New Yorker about the real state of what happened during COVID-19. As a writer, you've got to have an imagination about what could possibly take place, or how do we bounce back? Like there's pitfalls and there's hope, there's possible, bright futures, and there's possible dystopian futures. Like when you look at the future, what do you see?
Joe Rogan's Comedy Club. It's a good place to start, right?
Well, I would love to have that here.
Yeah. Can't you see it?
Yes, I could
All
see
right.
that.
Well, there are other people with similar visions, and this is a reset time. Our culture has been leveled. There are a lot of things that are going to change. Like office spaces, skyscrapers, that kind of thing. We're going to see. You're going to be living in a city where a lot of people are moving. They're drawn to. First of all, they're escaping. They're escaping the idea of cities. It's been scarring, I think, to be trapped in a building where you have to ride an elevator every day.
Yeah.
And push the button, you might die. People long to have be outdoors, and so they're moving to places where those things are easier. A lot of people in the West are leaving because of the fires. Climate change and things like that have made a big difference. So people are moving, and if you're in New York or L.A., and you're looking at a map of America and you're thinking, where should I go? There aren't a lot of places that, what is like, there's no place like New York. There's no place like L.A., but there are places that have attributes that make those places congenial. And, so Texas is one of the places where a lot of people wind up because it's dynamic. I think that's and also there are places inside Texas like Austin that are tolerant and interesting. And, I think Austin has had a reputation for being cool, far beyond what it deserves. And this has gone on for as long as I've been here. Ever since I moved to Austin, when people would ask me, where are you from? Texas, you get this kind of look. Where in Texas? Austin. Oh, Austin, it's forgivable, right? And it's supposed to, I hear it's great.
If you say Waco, they'll look at you sideways.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those places that people think about moving if they have to.
I had an opportunity to buy David Koresh's Mustang at one point in time.
And you passed it up?
I fucked up. I didn't have a place for it. It was for sale, and I had already bought. I have a bit of a car problem.
That's not totally understandable. I think that's a worthy problem.
Yeah, and also I didn't know if I wanted to have his car, because I was like,
bad juju.
I don't know. Like, is a '68 Camaro, which is a nice car. I like '69s a little bit more, a little wider car. That's it right there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It was for sale.
That's David Koresh's car?
Yeah.
Well, if he should have spent more time working on the car.
Why? It looks great.
Yeah, it looks great, but you just driving around a little bit would be that's a beauty.
He, like most cult leaders, was too busy trying to fuck the wives of all of his...
It always comes up, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's the thing they always do. They always want to have access to everyone's wife.
Right.
It's kind of crazy how these patterns just emerge over and over and over again. That's like one of the big ones. They want to separate you from your family.
Yeah.
That's like one of the... I've had Steve Hassan on the podcast before, who's a occult expert.
I know him, yeah.
Yeah, who was in the Moonies himself. Like,
yeah.
He got rescued. And he sort of outlined the steps they do, but one of the things is like remove you from the influence of your family.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And with Koresh, they literally had a walled compound and brought everybody into the compound, and this one guy with this vision. And it's funny, it's like we have these tolerant people, like we tolerate a certain level of the Joel Osteen's, like seems to be doing more harm than he's doing good, or more good rather than he's doing harm. Let it go. No big deal. Yeah, he's making a lot of money, and yeah, he's doing all this, and it doesn't seem right, but at least he's not banging everybody's wife.
Well, this brings up another memory, which in my church in Dallas, it was First Methodist Church, when I was growing up. Dallas had the reputation in the 60s of being like the most religious city in America. It had the largest Methodist, largest Baptist churches in the whole country, and one of the largest Presbyterians, and a large Catholic population as well. And it also had high rates of murder and divorce, and all of those things that you find in a really turbulent culture that Dallas was. And my father taught Sunday school for years and years, and then Robert Goodrich was our pastor, and he became a bishop, and his son was a quarterback on our high school team, so we knew all these people pretty well. And years later, the church had kind of gone into decline, and downtown Dallas was sort of inner city, and they brought in this charismatic young preacher named Walker Rayleigh, and his first action as a preacher in First Methodist was to blow into the microphone and breathe life into the church again. And he was very charismatic. He's great sermons, and I went to see him several times when we went back to Dallas for holidays and so on. I could see the attraction, and he's very progressive. And then these threats on his life began to appear. apparently because of his racial progressivism, and notes were slipped under his door, and FBI began to investigate, and then over Easter, there was a really a very straightforward threat to kill him, and so he wore a bulletproof vest under his vestments, and everybody inside the church circle, we're all terrified, and then his wife is strangled in the garage and into a coma. And Walker Raleigh did it.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Yeah,
I got suspicious almost immediately.
Well, he was never convicted. And I interviewed him, and he was have all the these piercing blue eyes and that sincerity. I don't know where you stand on me, but Larry, but I just this all come as a horrible shock to me. And I said, I think you did it. And I cited all
the courage to say that to his face.
I didn't think he could strangle me. Although we were in the kitchen where there were a lot of sharp knives, but yeah, there it is. How about that? You guys can really flush this out.
How do you say it? Right, Raleigh?
Raleigh, Walker Raleigh. He's he got off.
How did he get off?
Well, there was no witness.
Right.
There was talk that his children, he had 2 kids, and one of them may have been partially strangled. That's not clear, but
at the same time?
Yeah. And
like one of them might have been a witness?
Maybe, but the kid was never, and it turned out Walker Raleigh was having an affair with the daughter of our previous minister, Lucy Goodrich, who called herself Lucy Papillon.
Oh, Lucy.
And she played the piano in my father's Sunday school class. So I had my own brushes with I don't know. There's something about religion and sexuality. I wrote about Jimmy Swaggart, for instance, and this.
I've sinned.
Yes, indeed.
I remember that. That was wild.
When I went to his church, and man, that church was, you would have loved the services. I mean, it started off with, this bass drum and then a, guitar lick, and then the curtains open and it's just rocking, it was
It's entertaining.
Much better music than the First Methodist Church in Dallas. And Jimmy he was, a real performer. Yeah, there he is. And I remember at the end of the sermon, people would come up and he would embrace them. So.
And he liked to get hookers, right?
Very low class, out on Airport Road, they're sitting in a plastic lawn chair. That kind of thing. And
that's a bizarre fetish.
But I think that there's something about when you climb into the spiritual spotlight.
Is that her?
Yeah.
That girl?
Yeah.
She looks like she got her shit together.
Yeah. You're inviting a certain amount of sexual projection.
Because of the spotlight.
Yeah.
Well, then there's also the putting yourself in this position of being the ambassador of the Lord's word.
Right.
And you're preaching about this pious lifestyle and all the
well, also the emotionality that Swaggart. That was one of his signature things. Is that he would weep. That wasn't the only time he wept. He would weep. He would rant. He would speak in tongues. He would dance. Yeah. He would sing. And
is he dead now?
No, he's old.
Gotta get him in here.
I've thought about doing a follow-up. Because I'm intrigued by disgrace. And, so many titanic figures have fallen.
This guy that strangled his wife, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Walker Raleigh.
Raleigh. What did he say when he said, I think you did it?
If I remember correctly, it's sort of, I'm sorry you feel that way. He's now living in California. He's in L.A. He married another wealthy woman, I understand, and she set him up, and then she passed away. I don't know under what circumstances. And
Jesus!
Then I think he's with some. Anyway, he's got a Facebook page. He's there. He is. Yeah.
Wow. What year was this?
It's in the 80s. I'm sorry, I'm not good on.
No worries.
Yeah, and Peggy, his wife, in a coma. She lived for like 26 years. You can check to see when she passed away. Never regained consciousness, but was in a coma for that entire. And then it became a homicide.
When she died.
Yeah.
What was the evidence?
Yeah, it was all circumstantial. He left a telephone message. Honey, I'm running a little late. I don't know what time it is. He was driving a Honda, which has a little clock right there on the dashboard. And, I'm studying over at SMU,
Did you listen to the message?
I think it had been published. I quoted it, so I either listened to it or I read it. And but that was one of the things. He lied about not knowing what time it was. He lied about his whereabouts. He went over to visit Lucy. There was no. Also, all those notes and stuff were written to him. There was one point where
notes.
That I told you about the death threats. Mm-hmm. He wrote them himself.
Oh, written to him, you said, but you meant written by him.
Written by him.
Yeah.
And after Peggy was in a coma, Walker was in the hospital visiting, and he overdosed and left a suicide note about how wrong he had been, and but he never actually admitted what he had done.
He was wrong about.
Yeah.
So he tried to commit suicide, but survived.
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus.
So he was in a coma as she was in a coma.
Oh, Jesus Christ. And the wrong person came out of it.
Yeah.
It really goes back to what we were talking about earlier, this desire that people have to be this leader and to be this person with this secret inside knowledge and to be in control of a covenant, to be in control of a parish.
Well, that in your performing career, for instance, and there's some element of that.
There's wanting attention for sure. There's wanting acceptance. There's wanting to be successful, to be recognized by people for your work, for what you do. But you would hope that whatever pathology leads you to stand-up comedy in the first place, because there's not a single person that gets in it that's not fucked up. Like, you have to have something wrong with you to want to be a comic, because it's such a brutal, emotional battle.
Yeah.
You bomb so often, particularly in the beginning, and bombing is devastating.
I bet.
It is the worst. It's I described it as it's like sucking 1,000 dicks in front of your mother. But the thing is, I think there's probably a person out there that wants to suck 1,000 dicks in front of their mother. I doubt there's a person who wants to bomb.
Yeah.
It's a devastating, but it's also for a person like myself who grew up in martial arts, it's a complex challenge. It's a complex challenge of managing concepts and emotions and how to get an idea across to people. And in a way, it's a kind of a mass hypnosis, because you're trying to bring people into a state of mind where they think the way you're thinking and they allow you to think for them, and then you can get them to feel good and laughter. It's very rewarding.
I bet.
To look at it as an art form, it's a very rewarding art form when it's done well, like a show that's done well. But I was telling Jamie the other day, I fuck up one line of one joke, and then it will haunt me for days.
Sure.
I won't be able to enjoy dinner. I'll be driving in my car by myself, and I'll just be like, ugh.
No, I'm the same way. I discovered an error in my novel just the other day. It's been published.
Oof.
It's out there. And it's a terrible error. And it's been many eyes were on it, copy editors, you know, me many times, you know, it all slipped by, and but that achievement of getting a laugh is, you know, it even just in an ordinary setting, you know, if you come up with something that's funny I remember some of my best lines for decades, you know, and you know, I will never tell them again because, but you know, it's like that was the moment when I got it right.
In that moment,
yeah.
No, those are magical moments, and as a comic, it's a like I said, it's a really rewarding art form, but I don't have a desire to like lead people or to be revered or to have some sort of I mean, it sounds ironic that I do have this weird platform, but this is all accidental. This came about from just hanging out with my friends talking shit.
Really?
And most of the time we were high. Like almost all the early podcasts, we were blasted out of our head.
Yeah.
Because we're living in California, you know, and most of the early ones were all comedians. So we just have an excuse to get baked and to just make each other laugh and to put some stuff out on the internet. And then along the way, I started saying, man, I'd like to talk to that guy. I'd like to try to get some guests. And then all of a sudden I have scientists on and professors and it just athletes. It just got weird. And it became what it is now. But it was never a plan. It was just something that sort of happened. And now, you know, over the last few years, I've recognized like, oh shit, I have like a responsibility. Like I can't just talk shit anymore because now people are listening.
Well, there's a whole aftermarket of you know, the other people commenting on your shows.
And taking things out of context and misrepresenting what my intention was. And then also like just the act of, you know, what I would call talking shit. Like when especially comics are around talking shit, they don't mean what they're saying. They're just being silly. Yeah. They're just trying to say provocative, outrageous things to get a reaction from each other, to crack each other up, or to have fun. And when you take that stuff and you put it in quotes, it becomes a totally different animal.
Right.
You take away all the flavor and the fun, and now it's just like it's a hurtful thing or an ignorant thing, or it's the podcast has become a very different endeavor than what I initially had. But it also, because of the higher profile, now it's allowed me to talk to more interesting people and more influential people. Like we're talking about the Elon Musk conversation before the show.
Fabulous conversation.
Fantastic. It's just to have an opportunity to sit down with one of the most interesting people I think that's ever lived, and one of the most productive and prolific people. I mean, just the fact that he's able to juggle all these plates simultaneously. He's a really unique guy. And off air, like super friendly, like really easy to talk to. Very nice. When I first met him, I was kind of taken. It took a while during the first conversation I had with him to loosen him up. Mm-hmm. It took a while for him to relax because he was one way, and then we were on camera, and then all of a sudden he's very aware that he's on camera, and he was a little tense. So then the whiskey started flowing, and then I pulled out a joint, and that became history. But it was all only possible because the podcast had become this thing where it was like, here you have some ideas, go there, and then you can get those ideas out, and there's no middleman. There's no one's going to stop you from discussing things. There's no producer's going to run in and say this is not appropriate or this is controversial or we'd like to steer away from this subject. Like I don't want to steer away from anything. If you want to talk about it, I'm more than willing to talk about it. I think any subject can be approached reasonably, you know. And when a guy like him wants to come on, and particularly when I found the most interesting thing, like I could tell talking to him that it was almost like when you're looking in his eyes and he's discussing these things, it's almost like his brain is just wired different. Yeah. And when I said that to him, I was like I have this feeling that like what is it like to be you? And he was like, you wouldn't want to be me. Like, and that he realized when he was really young that it was different, that he thought everyone's mind worked like that.
Right.
His brain is just like a tornado of ideas, and he's just trying to like use his time as wisely as possible to give attention to all these different ideas, whether it's the Boring Company or whether it's a solar power company or Tesla or SpaceX. It's like, who the fuck is running that? I mean, companies that are that influential, that powerful, that significant, and 4 of them simultaneously?
Yeah.
Like, how is that even possible?
Well, what's interesting about, I was going to say people like Elon Musk, and there aren't very many people like him, but
Ever.
they challenge you about what life could be, what you might be. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, you say you fell into this, but in a way, you created it, organically. You made it you. And Elon Musk, of course, he, made a couple of $1 billion to get started, but he just he allowed himself to become himself.
Yeah.
There was a role out there in the universe that he could step into. And I think that's true for all of us in many ways. I think we all get handicapped. Oftentimes I'm in countries where, I'm dealing with people who will never be fulfilled. Their culture is so confining. They can never be who they might be.
Yeah.
But we're not in that culture. And so, the potential to become bigger than we are is always there. But there are only a few people that actually become as big as they might be. And sometimes, you're limited by money or opportunity. We talked about some of those neighborhoods in Baltimore or something like that. Those, they're tremendous barriers. But there are people that come out of those places and take the world on. And, there's something fascinating to me about accepting the challenge. There's a lot of risk involved. You can be totally deluded. And I'm sure you know people who think that they're so great.
Yeah.
And everybody knows they're not, and it's a huge joke. But there are also people like Elon Musk who think they could be greater. And they are able to, I don't know.
I think that's a very significant point, that the people that think they're great but they're deluded. That is the most toxic attribute that a person can have if they want to achieve something, because it'll keep you from progressing, because you have this distorted perception of your own worth. There's a lot of people out there that are extremely mediocre, that feel short-sighted.
Right.
They feel like people have looked past them. They haven't got their just due, and it's a weird thing. That sentiment, that idea that you haven't gotten the attention you deserve. No, you get exactly what you deserve.
Yeah, that's the sad thing. And is it the case that they're in the wrong calling? That
Not
could
necessarily. I think a lot of it is just discipline. A lot of people are not willing to work hard enough to grow. Like that feeling that you have when you found that you have an error in your novel, and it just fucking rots you. Just that feeling. Everybody doesn't get that feeling.
Yeah.
Some people are very satisfied with their work, even if their work is mediocre. Some people think that their stuff is awesome just because it's them,
Yeah, I think that's one of the advantages of mixed martial arts, I'm sure, is you find out really quickly where you stand.
Yeah.
And the truth is laid bare. And
You can't lie to yourself, because if you're lying to yourself, if you're pretending, there's physical consequences.
And the same thing is true for stand-up.
Yeah.
The laugh tell you, are you who you would like to be or think you are or not? And, also I think in writing, people buy your books or they don't. They go see your play or your movie or they don't. There's a critics weigh in. All of these things that you get feedback about where you are versus where you want to be.
Right.
And I'm in a kind of unusual spot, and I'm a lot further ahead than I ever thought I'd be. I never thought I would achieve the kind of success that I've had. And I'm really grateful for it, but it makes me wonder, what if I'd been more ambitious when I was younger? What if I had, gone to? What if I laid in some study time that I didn't have?
But doesn't this mirror what we were talking about before the podcast started? We were saying about the differences between our culture and other cultures. Is that like we're, at least as a concept, endlessly ambitious. We want to work harder. We want to put in more hours, but to the detriment of our personal lives, the detriment of our relaxation and social time. Like if you had been more ambitious, would you have been you, and would you have had the same kind of impact that you've had? Like, isn't part of the reason why you've had the kind of impact that you've had is that you really just have concentrated on the work. You've concentrated on whether it's with Going Clear or your book about the pandemic or whatever these things are. From my admiration of you, you're a guy who puts incredible focus on a subject. And you seem to be, correct me if I'm wrong, you seem to get absorbed in the work. If you're really ambitious, then you're thinking about end results. Then you're thinking about ultimate goals, or you're thinking about numbers. Like, where's the benefit in that? When you obviously are wealthy, you obviously are healthy, you obviously are fulfilled in terms of your career. Why would you want to be more ambitious?
Oh, that's an interesting point. I think if I had a realization, a kind of epiphany at some point, and I tend to have these. I've had my 2 or 3 in my life where something came really clear, almost like a voice, in my ear. But the helpful little tidbit that came into my ear was, nobody's going to remember you.
Even if they do remember you, they're going to die too.
Yeah, well, all the writers that were famous when I was in college, if you go to college now, they don't know their names. They don't know who Norman Mailer is or Gore Vidal or any
Jack
of those people.
Kerouac,
Those people have all been forgotten. A small pool of recondite, literateurs will know those names. But, those were the people that were just like, I'll never be that.
Yeah.
And then that subsided into, they aren't that either. They just, their reputation's so mighty at one time, have all diminished into the pool of forgetfulness. And that'll happen to everybody except, Shakespeare, a few, and those, those giant names of the past are enshrined in the academy so firmly that it would take a lot to remove them. But I can see a time when, reading and, that sort of thing is going to be overtaken by other pursuits, and, no writers will really be known very well.
I don't know about that. I think there's always going to be a desire to hear the well-formed thoughts of intelligent people and creative people. I think that's always going to be the case because there's something incredibly rewarding about whether it's great fiction or nonfiction, about reading someone's really well thought out, well edited work. It's a giant part of what makes us understand each other, is reading other people's writing or seeing their work, whether it's music or comedy or anything. Like seeing what happens when someone focuses on a thing and hones it down and puts it into a presentable package, and this is done here. And then you distribute it to the world. And then the world reads it and takes it in and goes, oh, wow, I like how he thought about that. And it changes the way people think about things. It changes the way people consider things. It gives people energy and enthusiasm. It gives them motivation and ambition. I think writing is always going to be a thing. I think it's a very important thing. And I know for me personally, when I get less focused on things, when I feel like more maybe less in control of my thought process, is when I'm not writing.
Yeah.
When I sit down and I force myself and I discipline myself to write, I feel like my thoughts are better formed. They're more concise. They're better they're more easily digestible to other people, and I think it's a direct result of focus and discipline. The focus and discipline to sit down and put the work in.
Yeah.
And then when I do that muscle, whatever that thing is, it grows. It gets stronger. It gets sharper. The endurance or whatever it is, it becomes more it becomes more applicable in all the other things that I do in life. I think writing's always going to be a thing. I really
Well,
do.
you said that so well. It made me proud of my profession, and then also because you said it so easily, it undermines your argument.
Well, it's something I've thought about a lot, you know. I've also thought about like my own profession, the various stages of it. Like in the beginning, I remember just wanting to work. I just wanted to be a professional. I couldn't imagine being able to pay my bills just telling jokes. And then it got to a point, well, God, I would love to be like really successful. I want to be famous. Like there's comedians that sell out comedy clubs. Yeah. And then there's comedians that sell out theaters. Holy shit, I can never sell out a theater. And then all of a sudden I'm selling out theaters. And then it became arenas. And that was only over the last few years. But that's the most bizarre shit. When you walk into a room and there's 15,000 people all waiting to hear you talk. Yeah. It's the strangest thing on earth. But the ambition has changed to now the main focus, and even while all that stuff happened, it was like the more impressive things happened, the more I just focused on work. Instead of focusing on getting attention, which is what I did when I was really young and starting out, I focused on just being better at the thing. And the more I was better at the thing, the more I focused on that, then the other kind of success sort of just fell into place. But that's not what I ever think about. I always just think about the work itself. And the more I think about that, about how to put the bits together and how to make them better and how to edit them, and maybe I should go over that again. Maybe I'm just settling for this position. Yeah. Maybe I need to like rewrite it entirely and start from scratch and switch it around and maybe to look at it from a totally different angle. That's when it's been the most rewarding for me. But also I feel the least responsible for it, which is the weirdest part about it. It's like I feel like when something is done, even though I know I put a whole lot of work into it, it's like I just showed up. And it's almost like Pressfield writes about the muse, and he writes about it like it's like a real thing. Like treat it like it's a real thing that you show up and you put in the work, and then it'll come visit you. Mm-hmm. And it almost feels like that sometimes. It almost feels like the better I get at it, the more successful I get at it, the less I feel like I did it. And the more I feel like it's just a matter of me forcing myself to show up, and then this process takes place.
I look at it a little differently, because I think people that are hugely successful are the most true to themselves. And Elon Musk is an excellent example, mm-hmm. But to be somebody else or to correspond to a stereotype of some sort is very limiting. And also, you don't have the original genius that comes along with being who you really are. Mm. And so it seems to me that what you've done is command all the Joe Rogan-ness that you can and poured it into a novel form and made it part of you. And, if you were trying to be something else, it might not be, wouldn't give you the chance to be who you are in the genuine way that this does.
Maybe that's true, but maybe the way that I'm able to do that is by just getting out of my own way and not thinking about me at all.
But that's the same thing. Yeah. You're getting out of your own way. When you say that, what's getting in your way is social constructs that are not you.
Right.
And if you remove those and just allow, whatever is your essence to manifest itself, then, you may go to prison. Who knows what that essence is. But on the other hand, you become authentically who you are. And I think that's what people are so hungry for in any field, whether it's comedy or, politics or writing. They want something that feels real.
I think you're 100% right about authenticity. I think that's the thing that I value more than anything. Whether someone's right or wrong, if I hear them talk or I hear their take on things, if I know it's genuinely coming from their real thoughts, there's no ideological bend, it's not some predetermined position that they've taken, but they're just actually thinking about things and looking through it and trying to formulate their thoughts in an honest way. I can appreciate that more than anything, because it's especially in the broadcast medium, it's so rare because there's too many gatekeepers. You know, to have an idea and to bring it to a television show, like for instance, it's like you're going through so many people. It's so difficult to get your own actual thoughts and have them unmolested and then distribute them to the world.
Yeah, I went through that with. We did a adaptation of the Looming Tower, and it was not hard, honestly. But the problem was that there were a lot of people over the years that wanted to do it, and I didn't want them to because I thought, 9/11 is kind of sacred, and you don't go make entertainment of it. But on the other hand, it needs to, kids now, they don't have any experience of it. So
Right.
It was like World War II for me. My dad was in the war.
Right.
Well, I wasn't. So I thought it was important to memorialize it. And I produced it, with a couple of friends. And, we were able to, the thing was they couldn't fuck with it. There had to be this general agreement that, the tone has to be exactly right. Because if you get it wrong, it'll be a sin in some way. And so anyway, it was a good experience. I'd like to do it again. But I know what you mean. I've pitched things in the past, and the pitching itself is kind of great. It's such a high feeling. Nothing comes of it. Everybody calls their agents and stuff like that. Oh, they loved you, this sort of thing.
Yeah.
It never goes anywhere.
1 out of 100.
Yeah, just doesn't. But I don't know. I like to work in different formats. So I love the movies and I love plays. And
What are you working on now?
well, I'm finishing a book about COVID, and I had I told you about a little bit about my movie background, but I had a play that we had 2 productions here in Austin. It was called Sonny's Last Shot at the time, and it was a lot of fun. It was about Texas politics, and it's set in the Texas House of Representatives, my favorite political body, and it never traveled. And I thought, well, a Broadway producer came down and took a look, and she said, thought about it as a musical? And I said, well, yeah, Texas politics does make you want to dance.
Yeah.
So I and a great pal of mine, Marcia Ball, who's a singer-songwriter, piano player, extraordinary and beloved figure in Austin music. She and I started writing music for it. And then Broadway producer bailed on it. And said, it shouldn't be a musical. It should be a television series. So we went to HBO and sold it. And I wrote a pilot, and they fired my executive and trashed all of his projects. So I had neither a series nor a musical. And then I started to write it as a novel because I thought I got to get the story out somehow. But I'd missed the music. So it's now going to become a podcast.
What?
A musical podcast.
Really?
Yeah. And my son, Gordon, who's also a musician, has joined me and Marcia. And we're writing new songs. I wish I had written songs when I was younger because it's a huge amount of fun. And the kind of writing I do is usually very solitary. My creative process is, essentially, I spend the whole day alone. And, working with other really creative people is a great joy, but especially these people. So we're having fun. And, we just wrote a couple of songs over the holidays.
That's awesome. Well, I love that you're willing to take on all these different kinds of projects.
It all comes from nobody's going to remember you. It's like Jerry Lee Lewis. I idolize him. One of the reasons I took up the piano was I wanted to play Great Balls of Fire on my 40th birthday. So I took up piano when I was 38 and a half. and I even got my feet into it as is required. But he's always done the same thing, and he's Jerry Lee Lewis, and he's kind of imprisoned by that. And does he ever want to sit down and play a little Dvorak, or something like that? Who knows? But as shocking as it might sound, nobody's going to remember him either. And if you no longer are tied to this idea of becoming really famous and having this enduring legacy, it frees you up to do whatever you want to do. And in a way, that's become my brand. He's the guy who does everything. And I'm all right with that. But I would rather do this and maybe not have quite a deep trough in the culture. But, if you just keep trying to write one book after another, some of them are not going to be any good. But if you are diversifying and I have an idea for a play, but it's not a book. You're supposed to be writing books, and that play never gets done. But if it's a really good idea, that's the hardest part in the creative field, I think, is getting the idea. And there's just precious few of them.
Yeah.
And so, I have to pay attention to the ideas as they come to me.
Well, it's a great freedom to be able to chase different ideas and to pursue different kinds of work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And every one of them reinforces the other. When people say, well, you write movies and plays and, nonfiction, there's the "Are you crazy?" question that is my editors often ask me. But by writing movies and plays, there's no narrative in them. It's all scenes and dialogue. Those are very powerful elements, and too often ignored by nonfiction writers. And, if you incorporate the kind of scenic construction in a nonfiction story or book, it gives it a tremendous amount of power. And contrarily, if you take your skills of reporting and apply it to fiction, learn how the world really works, make it feel real and authentic, it cross-pollinates. And I think I'm a far better writer because I have developed these tools from different kinds of craft.
That's a great way to end this. We just did 3 hours. Can you believe it?
Oh,
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive. Yeah.
Pretty amazing, right? There's like a time warp in this room.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, man. I
Been
really
my
appreciate
great
you.
pleasure, Joe.
Mine
Thank
as
you.
well. Thank you very much. Bye, everybody.